think we're live. I feel like I want to like double check on YouTube to make sure everything's going well. All right, yeah, we are live. I see 5 viewers. So what's up, 5 people?
Nice.
5 good
The
people
whole
watching.
gang is here.
Yeah, the whole squad's out here. Can you say something about One Dime and what the name represents? Because I heard you kind of explain it in one of the videos, and it was really an interesting kind of concept.
Did I explain it? I don't think I ever explained it in a video. I might have
maybe
given
I heard
hints.
something about it. All right, well, if you don't want to go into it, but
No, I can't. No, I
okay.
can. But take a guess first.
Well, I already kind of know that it was about like countering one-dimensional thought, right? Isn't that the idea?
That's one of the themes for sure. Like, there's kind of multiple things it represents.
Okay.
And I made it intentionally like that. One-dimensional thought is one of them for sure. Mainly, I came up with that because I was reading this book called One Dimensional Man by Herbert Marcuse, and I was like, it's one of probably my favorite books I ever read, and sort of came. I was looking for a YouTube name for a while. I had no idea. I wanted to start YouTube for a long time. I had no idea what to call my name, and I thought that was interesting. I also like the idea of I make $1, my boss makes a dime. That's why I take a shit on company time.
Yeah.
If you read some Marx and understand, the exploitation, makes a little bit of sense. So there's like many ways you could interpret it. So that's kind of why I called it. Yeah. It's also just short.
Yeah. No, it's a good name. What was your take on the whole anti-work Fox News fiasco? I was going to start this video talking about hip hop, but I feel like we're going down a different direction, but we will get to the rap stuff. But I'm just curious, like, because I just want to hear your take on that. I'm sure you've seen
on what anti-woke stuff.
No, anti-work. You know, the subreddit where the mod went on Fox News.
I think it's anti-woke.
Oh no, but we can talk about that too.
Anti-work. Yeah, I mean, I've been paying attention to that subreddit because I used to post my videos there. I had a post about my Burnout Society video, the self-help hustle culture video, the one that criticizes. I will kind of use as Gary V as like a poster child.
Yeah.
Of hustle culture, and I posted my thing there, and it got a lot of votes. So, but the thing, my impression always with the anti-work subreddit, it's like it gets at a important phenomena, and that is, the alienation that modern work life brings us. But it really is so heavily depoliticized, and that's partially due to the mods there. The mods try to make it. I don't know if it's maybe there's some financial backers or if it's just the mods happen to be dickheads, but they just kind of really banned any sort of things that was radical, like anarchist groups, Marxist groups would post their very valuable stuff sometimes, and they would just take it down. They would take it down anything that is like radical, and they would water down their demands so much. Yeah, and the kind of, it doesn't surprise me how it's ended up. Like, it doesn't surprise me. Let's just say that.
Well, just for me, honestly, watching that video or watching that person represent the anti-work movement kind of pissed me off because I felt like they did such a horrible job of articulating why people are anti-work. At least, the people on that subreddit. Like, for example, when Jesse Waters or whatever his name is, was like, oh, so you just want to be lazy. And the person's like, yeah, laziness is a virtue, and like spoon feeding the Fox News narrative to them, where when I think about anti-work, I don't think about, it's not that we are like looking forward to being lazy our entire lives. Not that people don't want to work, but that people want to get a fair value for their labor. People want to be treated with dignity, and people don't want to be threatened with starvation if they want to change jobs, or not having insurance and all these other issues. So I don't know. It just really bothered me that, like, the Fox News got to get that clip of the anti-work mods just glorifying laziness, when I really don't think that's uh, like a fair assessment of anti-work.
Yeah, and it's also, yeah, it was just a terrible misrepresentation of the whole thing, and it's of course it's not just about it's be. I want to say two things, because like anti-work is partial. There is an element that is aimed to destigmatize laziness and how we define laziness. And then there's the also aspect that just the nature of work, the type of work we work. First of all, just way too long. Regardless if it's a capitalist mode or not, it's just too long. We work 9 to 5 hours for, and it's also not only inefficient for the system we're in. It's been shown that people do more work when we actually have less time. Like 4-day work weeks are proven to be more efficient, and 5-hour work days. But also, it's just like a waste of life. It takes away so much of our passion, so much of our time. And then there's also the part that doesn't really get discussed at all by like the anti-work subreddit, which is the exploitative nature of work. The idea that you're working a lot of the time, especially if it's in the private sector, for someone else's profit. Really, like you get paid the bare minimum that they can get away with, and what you produce extra is basically that surplus profit that is going to the employer. So there's that, but there's also like we have
Right.
a whole work culture where work's an end in itself. It's treated as a virtue that just is doing something, even if it's a completely pointless job, a job that is either just pointless completely or has a purpose, but a very corrosive purpose, maybe like advertising or something like that. um, uh, it has value for the system, but is it beneficial for society? Doing something is looked at as better than, quote unquote, not working at all, or not just even not working, but people who often do alternative type of professions are usually looked down upon until they're successful. That's how parents tend to be, right? Is Parents who are often like older people in general who are brainwashed into the Protestant work ethic, the idea that the just working hard is like, it's almost like it's a moral thing, looked at in the
Yeah.
moral terms. If you're doing something like, I don't know, you're artists, you make music, you make videos, you do whatever, all sort of other type of alternative careers, usually looked down pretty negatively because it's perceived as, unless you're successful. Suddenly, when you become successful, because the money's coming in, they're
Right.
treated well. But until then, it's usually looked down upon because it's perceived as fun. And when something's perceived as fun, it's not perceived as work. And this is just totally a bad way to look at work. We shouldn't look at work as it's supposed to be. We look at work as it's supposed to be demeaning and like almost a punishment. Like as it's we really haven't outgrown the sort of theological way we look at work with that, with Protestant Christianity. We still look at things as if we're supposed to work these terrible jobs and supposed to suffer because it's for some afterlife. Even if people aren't
Yeah.
explicit about it, it's almost implied, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense, especially in a cultural sense. I mean, I don't know. I can speak from personal experience that if I'm just sitting around being lazy, doing nothing, I can enjoy that for maybe 1 or 2 days. Um, but on the other hand, I've only had one job in my entire life where I've actually felt satisfied and valued and passionate about my work. Um, so I guess what I'm wondering, like, in your opinion, is it more about being against work itself and this kind of cultural shift, and not thinking of laziness as less of this kind of broader evil, or is it more about um, having the opportunity to like for people to be passionate in their jobs and treated with dignity, and or having ownership in the company that they work for, like, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I think it's about both, but I don't really hear the ownership aspect doesn't really get discussed enough. especially not
Yeah.
by the anti-work movement, because it's very inherently political. And that's the thing, is a lot of these big broad movements, they try very hard to avoid politics, probably because sometimes there's a conflation between like marketing and trying to build a movement. And that's where
Right.
I think sometimes like movements like anti-work or subreddits, they want to seem accessible. And it's, I think you could be accessible by making the language accessible and appealing to people's like alienation and needs and stuff
Hmm.
like that, but not by dumbing it down to the point where it doesn't offend anybody. I think the being very depoliticized, like anti-work, comes from this tendency to not want to offend any group. Because if you go political, you might, I don't know, defend some libertarian, conservative, liberal, whatever.
Hmm.
Uh, and that's the thing, is the movement. Part of what we should be talking about is, yeah, working less hours, and also kind of our relationship to work, right? Should we really accept this type of situation where we work for companies where, we're working more than what we're getting paid for? And that's kind of part of the nature of exploitation, is that surplus
Yeah.
labor we put in to our work is profited
So
by the employee. And there's many alternatives to this, right? There is the idea of having like collectives, cooperatives.
right.
That's one thing that's becoming popular again, is the idea of cooperatives. Um, is the idea that, it's not just ownership in business. Yeah, the workers should have ownership in the business, but it's also kind of
Mhm.
control,
Mm.
like democratization. We think we're supposed to live in a democracy, right? Supposedly, although I would argue countries like the U.S. don't even have political democracy, because you really choose between two parties that are pretty much the same,
Mhm.
except on a few issues. And but we don't, like, not most societies, period, in general, don't have economic democracy. Which is, think about, we spend most of our time at work, like
Mhm.
99% of our lives. Why is that not democratized? Why don't we have a say? Why do we have to like basically live under like mini dictators? It's like, I have the most money here. I can buy the shares. You do what I say, right?
Mhm.
Whereas the people who should be putting in the most like work should, have the democratic control and influence over how that profits are distributed, how the work is organized. All these things require very
Mhm.
political solutions, right? Reductions in work time, the changes in business laws, these aren't going to come out of the sky. It's not, eventually it has to get out of just being sociocultural. As to,
Right.
there's someone at the end of the day who has to go into politics and kind of champion this stuff, and there has been, right? There's been people like Jeremy Corbyn, sort of on the social democratic left, Bernie Sanders, who've championed stuff like this. So I think, we always, there's a way to get people in through culture and through mass social appeal, social movements. But from
Mhm.
there has to be a shift also to politics, or else what is the point, really? You end up like anti-work. That
Yeah.
anti-work subreddit, is it just ends up shooting itself in the foot and kind of becoming a watered down, frankly, you can't even call it anti-establishment movement anymore, in my opinion, because it's, I mean, look at the mods, what they're doing.
Yeah. Um, what do you think about this past year or two where we've seen this great resignation where it does seem like there are a lot of corporate employees who have a lot more power than they did before, where they could easily dip, they could dip from their job, find another better job with better culture that values diversity and will give them equity in the company. But at the same time, I've also noticed this is like a very double edged sword for the workers who are the most replaceable. Um, but you do see like Del Taco raising their hourly rate to like $20 an hour starting, and kind of a movement towards that. Obviously, it's very delayed, and this is something that should have happened a long time ago. Do you think that like the pressures here are just like business owners' hands are being completely forced to offer better benefits and offer more salary? Like, and if so, like how can we keep this pressure going? Because I do think that this is a positive force that we've seen come out of the pandemic.
Yeah, that's one thing that has one of the very few things that's positive that came out of the pandemic is that indirectly workers have found a way to get more leverage. And it's interesting why this is the case because with the pandemic, the government was in a position to do one of two things. Well, it could have done many things, but why did it give people money? I mean, in the US, you got a few $1,000 checks, but it was actually even more radical in many other countries. Like where I live in Canada, we got people who either lost their job or aren't available to work got, it's no longer the case now, but they got $2,000 a month. Yeah, it was called CERB, sort of like a
Oh.
UBI, but it wasn't universal. And
Hmm.
in countries like France and Britain, you got around 70% of your salary paid if you applied for the government programs and whatnot. But why did they do this? Is it because the government is just nice? And no, it's because when you have a situation where there's a huge virus, a pandemic, and people are locking down, the whole economy is shutting down, you're in a position where you can let the public starve, because that's frankly what would happen. A lot of people aren't able to work if they don't get any funds. They really struggle. And I mean, even arguably the money that was given to people wasn't enough to cover necessities, because a lot of people were working illegally, doing all sorts of ways to make money behind the scenes, behind curfew, understandably, which shows why the handouts still weren't enough. Um, but because the government did this, so people wouldn't revolt en masse, and two, so people have money to buy products, because this system collapses if people aren't constantly buying things, because we're in a system where basically that kind of relies on increasing profit rates, and that's often that's reflected through investment. People will invest in companies expecting returns if profits, and they expect dividends, which comes from the profits. And if profits decrease, investment decrease, you get bankrupt companies en masse, and that happened. So if you didn't give money to people to buy stuff, the whole system would have collapsed. But this had even though this sort of helped save the capitalist system in a way, it has this sort of backfiring effect, at least in the perspective of the ruling elite, is that now, because workers are receive benefits, they are able to organize more easily, because suddenly, okay, I have some free time on my hands. I have
Hmm.
a way to like survive on this money. I can organize and bargain for higher wages. And not just that, there's also the psychological component. A lot of people who went into mass lockdowns kind of reevaluated their lives. Like, you really think about, we
Right.
don't have a lot of time to think about shit in our
Yeah.
day-to-day life, because
That's
we're
something
always
I want to talk about later too. Yeah, sorry. Continue.
Yeah, for sure. Because I'm down for that. Because we don't have time to really just think about. We have a limited amount of time, energy, so to speak,
Hmm.
um, because we're always at work. And with lockdowns, that's like kind of the well, most people seem to just kind of spend it by going on Netflix and whatever, which understandably, but this gives a lot of people time, and there's a lot of psychological discomfort that comes with that. But I think a lot of people reevaluated their lives. A lot of people were like, geez, like, especially if you have a family, um, there's other stuff I could be doing with my time. Like, there's so much I'm missing due to this persistent 9 to 5 work culture. And I think a lot of people, even people who might have not been working class, a lot of people who might have had like fairly good, decent paying jobs, who just found them really alienating, like bullshit
Hmm.
office jobs, corporate jobs, all sort of stuff like that,
Yeah.
are just quitting because they're realizing, geez, like there's other things I could do. I could pursue things I actually like. A lot of people discovered their passions. I mean, I didn't quit my job, but I lost one and got a new one. But um, I actually just started my YouTube channel during COVID. Uh,
Same.
Yeah, a lot of people did. I think it's no
Yep.
coincidence, because you have like a little bit more time, and
Hmm.
and a lot of us probably wanted to do this before, right? But we didn't have time, and COVID gives time, so you start doing things you care about and like.
Yeah.
I think that's why we get a big mass resignation. But the ruling class really doesn't like this, because that's why you mentioned Del Taco raising its wages. They have their most companies are raising their wages because it's a way to get people back to work, because people are
Hmm.
thinking like, why would I go to work for these like shitty wages for shitty work? So they're
Yeah.
kind of pressured to like raise. There's also all sort of strikes happening too. You heard about the Kellogg strike,
Yeah.
all kind of big strikes happening because people now have a bit of leverage. Before the
What really
optimal
shocked me about that is just the limited news coverage that any of those strikes got. Like I was barely seeing any coverage of that, and that just really made me realize like how how scared these corporate rulers must be. And yeah, I really like how you pointed out like that it exposed their vulnerability, us being able to stay home and rethink our lives, and just to see that if the government wasn't like paying people, then the whole system was on the brink. And I think that's pretty empowering for people. But
Mhm.
I definitely want to keep that momentum going. And there's a whole list of things we could talk about there too. Like, you know, there was this kind of mini recession, and that was essentially just delayed by these stimulus checks, and like what that kind of spells out for the future of the system. Um, you know, I
And
don't
that,
really have too much perspective, but I know you've done a lot of videos on like monetary policy.
yeah, and also the reason why you see wages going up is because there's finally bargaining power. For people forget often, especially Americans, is we're in this condition really ever since the late 1970s, where workers are in a position to compete for jobs. We're the one, like, we have to compete for like shitty jobs often, and this
Yeah.
is the unemployment rate is kept to a certain degree high enough for this to happen. It's deliberate.
Hmm.
The government can
Yeah.
solve employment very easily, and they had this every. It's so easy to solve employment. It's one of the easiest issues on the face of the earth to solve. And there was a long period where the United States and most countries in the world, at least like developed countries in the world, had full employment. They had something called the federal job guarantee. If you wanted a job, you would get a temporary job with the government in whatever, all sort of fields, construction, medical stuff, teaching, all sort of jobs, and you get training and you get paid a good wage to do this, and then you would be more employable in the private sector after. And you had this full
Hmm.
employment policy. If you were unemployed, you would be given a right to be found a job. And
Hmm.
this also allowed for just general higher wages across the board, because if you were treated terribly, um, it's like, you don't like working at Red Lobster, you can go work at I don't know, Kelsey's for a different wage, if something like that. Whereas in the predicament we're in, really since the last 30 years, it's not, we haven't had those opportunities, because unemployment rates are much lower. Um, sorry, a much higher unemployment
Hmm.
rate, intentionally, by the way. It's
Right.
the other way around. We have to like compete for jobs, and this lowers our wages. And a part of it's because the government, under what's called neoliberalism, sort of the shift, let's call it more free market capitalism, but with a very much more authoritarian state, uh, really since the 1980s, played a role in pretty much destroying unions. And unions and radical socialist labor movements played a big role before, really since World War II and the Great Depression before that, in making sure we had these rights. And
Hmm.
I would say like things have been getting perpetually worse since the 1980s, when most of that was undone. And we've only really seen, I would argue, a resurrection in sort of like progressive pro-worker politics since, number one, the 2008 crash, and since COVID.
Hmm. So you're saying that social benefits, job security, any kind of government assistance essentially threatens the corporate structure, and like empowers workers, and therefore like takes a lot of power away from the system.
Hmm. Yeah. And also, I should add one other thing is, you start to see now a lot of big rich people who complain about the government handouts and all that stuff, and they're mad about all sort of things, and I really think their reaction um, they're always calling it the labor shortage. You hear people complaining about the labor shortage. It's not really a
Mhm.
labor shortage. It's a good job shortage
Right.
and a good pay shortage. The fact that
Yeah.
it's like, okay, you want workers, it's not hard to find them. They exist. Just pay them properly,
Yeah.
like treat them well. And also maybe have like laws. I'm sure like if you had a workplace that you worked 5-hour work days and 4-hour work weeks, 4-day work weeks, or 3-day work weeks, some do, like you'd find plenty of people to employ very fast. um,
Mhm.
so there's all sort of ways to do that, but the business elite, of course, want to keep optimal profits by extracting as much value from people as possible. So they hate that, and this is why they hate something like a basic income. I don't think something like a universal basic income in some ways can save the system because it can allow for people to actually buy the stupid stuff the capitalists produce so they can keep
Yeah.
profits high, but they don't want it because
Right.
it actually gives us leverage. It gives us freedom. Like keep that word freedom, right? You mentioned at the start that you're in a system where we have to like work or starve. Yeah. How can we call ourselves free societies
Mhm.
if, pretty much like we're the only species on this planet that pays for water, that pays to fucking exist. It's one thing, yeah, we should have to like work and bust our ass to, get services from other people who have to work hard to make those things like, products and all sort of stuff like that. But basic human rights, it's insane. If we stop working for like 2 months, most people go homeless. Not even, much less.
Yeah.
So how can we
I
call it
mean,
say
most
we have
people
freedom?
don't have what, like $500 in savings. Like, isn't it like most Americans? And then at
Yeah,
least
that's
I think it's
insanity.
70% of Americans. And then if you go to millennials, it's like 90%. I mean, yeah, that's not a good system. I mean, there's
Like
so many,
everybody's in
yeah,
debt.
everybody who is, living okay isn't dead. There's so many ramifications. I think how you mentioned like in the 70s where there was a much higher corporate tax rate where things were like since then inequality has gotten far worse. I was just reading the Noam Chomsky book Requiem for American Dream, and he talks about how when these issues were coming up in American politics, there was essentially two options: increase democracy or reduce democracy or reduce inequality. And they basically just
Yeah.
went full send on reducing democracy, and that's something you touched on too. Um, this is something that really bothers me is that our democracy is essentially only a reflection of the will of what corporations want. Um, and this goes for the left and the right, which obviously, like you said at the beginning, they're basically in the same, essentially, especially in recent years, have been almost indistinguishable where it actually matters. So yeah, like I don't know. I just
I would add
yeah.
though, because you said left and right, I don't think there really is a left in America
Oh
up
yeah,
until
no,
very
I just meant
recently.
Democrats. Yeah,
Oh,
and I
okay,
totally
yeah, yeah.
agree. There
Because
there
the
barely is a
Democrats
left.
aren't left at all. Like the Democrats,
No.
so people like to say socially, but so it's not so much like the parties are moving left socially. It's more that people in general are moving socially, and the parties are just trying to get votes. Because like now you can't really win by being anti-LGBT or like anti-homophobic. You can't really win that way. So politicians uh, will kind of will support that on a surface level. But
Right.
economically speaking, the Democrats are about
Well,
as
that's what
right
I said.
wing
The
as the
issues that
Republicans in the
actually matter.
80s. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah. So you meant
Like
you meant the
anything
main
that's going to
parties.
actually help. Yeah, I did mean the main parties, and anything that's going to actually improve people's lives. I'm not talking about like, you know, trans women in sports or some stupid shit like that, that like realistically affects like almost nobody in the world.
Yeah, like the
Um,
culture war about that.
yeah, the
People
culture
think
war
that's the
stuff.
end
I
of the
mean,
world.
how like this really bothers me, and I don't really see a way forward for to reduce the influence of corporations on um, our democratic process, because the way it is right now, I mean, our voice is like a drop in the bucket compared to what a company can do to influence policies. Like it's super
I mean,
disheartening, and it yeah.
I would
Go
say,
ahead.
well, we do. It's more what we do with our power. So, like, we have the power, but it's whether we use it and know how to be organized with it. Because
Mhm.
we've saw like right, people have the ability to do all sort of things. Like people, en masse can just quit their job. If you get people on a
Right.
job to en masse to like quit, what can the companies do? Because the workers actually make their shit. They're
Right.
helpless. Like, what is Amazon without its workers? There's no Amazon without its workers. Those are the
Mhm.
people who really make the companies, right? I know it's not like the way like right, the way conservative um, sort of bootlickers try to portray it is, oh, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, like they're like these superhuman that create Tesla
Yeah.
just with their hand. It's like, no, there's
Mhm.
thousands of engineers and thousands of manufacturers like, doing the work, and if they decide to use
Mhm.
their power, the labor power, to organize and withhold that, they can
Mhm.
do a lot of damage. But it's what you do with that, right? I would say the problem with the labor movements, it's very highly depoliticized often, and especially now. So the demands will maybe be just higher wages, but there isn't a way to use that to kind of change a political system, get it behind a candidate, uh, join a sort of more radical party, radical movements, organizations to kind of use this collective power, right? This is a thing that always like the majority of people are, working class people who basically have to sell their labor, their work, in order to make it. That's kind of what defines a working class person, and not like how poor they are, but it's the relationship to sort of are the um, means of production, which is basically like the business. So our relationship to that working class people, we don't own things. We are not born with all sort of property. Um, we're don't make our money off of rents like landlords. The working class people more just kind of sell their labor on a market, but the one strength they
But is it
have
just selling
is
your
that,
labor though? Because people who are at the top, I mean, like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, like I still am under the impression that they work.
oh, of
I
course
doubt
they
they just
work,
sit around,
but
but they're
but what
working
I
in a
mean is,
position of power,
yes, but
right?
what I
So
was
it's not
like,
just the work
so
aspect, right?
they don't, they don't really make their money from incomes like wages. So they do get paid incomes, like that's the CEO salary, but that's like
Mm,
a joke compared to what their real wealth is. The real wealth is their ownership in the company. So and that
mm.
it grows exponentially. So you have you Jeff Bezos owns a majority. There's other like this is the thing. Not even just Jeff Bezos, but I cannot even work at Amazon. If I have $2 billion, I can purchase a whole lot of shares, thousands of shares of Amazon, and be entitled to exponential increases in wealth. Whereas if I work at Amazon and I actually produce at Amazon, if I don't have the ability to purchase that, I can,
Mhm.
it's a joke. Like I can probably buy like
Yeah,
3 Amazon shares at most. Whereas,
yeah,
a person who might not even work can make more off of it. So it's the relate again. It's the
right. So the
relationship
value
to,
of the labor.
yeah, precisely, because this is the thing. Like I don't know the statistics off of my head, but someone like Bezos, I would guess, probably makes, I don't know, like 500 times his employees. That's probably a lot. Probably a lot more than that.
Probably way more,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, I mean that's probably just a CEO salary. Sorry, like 500 times. But in terms of his overall net worth, it's obviously
Mhm.
thousands of times more. Um, and does he work? Does he work that much more than his employees to be paid that much more? Right? And I don't think anyone really believes that. Like, and
Right.
if one really thinks about that, it's not. It doesn't make any sense. Um, but here's the thing, right? So these people who own the means of production, they have all sort of power to influence the political system, and that's really what the taxes were for back in the day. They weren't really so much to to fund things, not at all, but the taxes were to prevent sort of this oligopoly class, like this class of super elite that can influence the government, which is what you have now. Basically, the vast majority of politicians who make their way into office, with a few exceptions, are funded by all sorts of billionaires and big corporate groups.
Mhm.
But the one power that workers do have is that we're the majority. People who um, the majority of people, don't, their primary source of income and wealth is not ownership in companies or like rents. It's what they get
Mhm.
paid in their salary. That's for the vast majority of people. And because it's the majority always has power and has it. It's whether they, number one, organize and use it, and two, the ideology. There's
Okay.
ideology plays a big role. People are taught to often believe the ideas of the ruling class. For example, like trickle down economics, the idea that if you
Mhm.
make the rich richer, the wealth will trickle down to the poor, and we know that's
Right.
not so true. Um, and all sort of other ideas, like don't even get me started, but like pretty much like liberal ideology and conservative ideology, like which is
Yeah.
really, at least in today, really just neoliberal ideology, and both of that, whether people are aware or not, it's the ideology of a ruling class. It's not an ideology that benefits majority of people,
Mhm.
but people maybe actively believing that ideology or tacitly believing in it. Like a lot of people will be apolitical on the surface consciously, but
Mhm.
subconsciously they will think things. They'll think that this system is just human nature, or this system is just the way it is. They'll kind of
Mhm.
tacitly accept it, and that's sort of what needs to be changed. I think before any real political change, you
Yeah.
need a larger part of the public to kind of be more aware.
So we
Not
need
so
more
much, not
people
so much to be
calling it out.
educated. Yeah, calling it out, and not so much just to be educated, to sort of unlearn what we've been taught. Because that's the bigger
Yeah.
thing. Is it's not so
Yeah.
much just getting the perfect ideas or whatever. It's unlearning the bad ideas. And once you do that, I think people are already way more powerful.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you tell someone the reason your boss makes 500 times more than you is because, capitalism requires you to be on the brink of poverty so you don't fight for more, so you don't risk trying to get a new job, trying to get more benefits, trying to increase your wages. Because it seems like that's kind of what you're saying with the stimulus check that allowed people that 2 months to be like, all right, I'm not going to show up to work today because I'll be okay for a little bit. But the way we have our country set up right now, most people don't have that buffer where they will be okay if they don't show up to work for a month and try to look for a new job. And it leaves, especially when your employment is tied, when your healthcare is tied to your employment. I mean, that has to be one of the most abusive things I've ever, um, like, that's just fucked up, and we like conceive that as a completely normal thing, where if you get fired from your job or you leave your job, you're now liable for your, you know an extremely predatory medical system.
Oh, the medical system. That's the thing is, the US, I've seen a lot of stuff lately. A lot of people showing skepticism about big pharma. And that's totally, like, I think, the left's been skeptical about big pharma for decades, but a
Right.
lot of people are becoming skeptical about big pharma for kind of the wrong reasons, in
Hmm.
my opinion. They're not
Yeah.
really looking at the financial things, and they're looking at more like grandiose conspiracies about like some cabal
Mhm.
of people who don't actually really have power. Uh, but
But isn't that
the
all political though? Like, to me, these people, most of these people have been vaccinated, at least 10 to 20 times in their life. Before the COVID vaccine, they never, had a single issue with, I think we all are collectively skeptical of big pharma, but like you said, or at least in my opinion, their skepticism is purely political. And
Oh, you
um,
mean like the sort of overt anti-vax conspiracy people?
yeah, like
Yeah, those people.
I don't
Yeah,
know. I am skeptical, but
those people are
yeah.
yeah. I wouldn't even say those people are very skeptical. They're more like selectively skeptical. They're like very
Right.
select because they'll say it's in my opinion. Yeah, it's fine to be like skeptical. Say what are side effects? What are why is this being released fast?
Mhm.
Whatever. Like or like actually looking at the evidence and the peer reviewed research and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But instead, they don't really even like read anything. A lot of the anti-vax people, they'll say, okay, what does this right-wing lunatic on TV say? And they'll say,
Mhm.
okay, I don't trust this big pharma. I'm gonna go take horse tranquilizer now.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
not that's not skepticism. It's literally just it. It's no different. It's no different than it's totally sheepish. Like they'll call other people sheepish or whatever, but people who will apply skepticism very selectively and then buy a whole ideology all of a sudden, like
Right.
a much less substantiated one. It's just stupidity, really. I mean, but
Yeah.
the thing is, the reason I mentioned big pharma is because you mentioned that the draconian healthcare system. I mean, a lot of the people, especially the kind of right wing pundits who will be skeptical about big pharma all of a sudden, sometimes they'll be skeptical about big pharma, but they'll not be skeptical about the healthcare system, which is they'll not support something like universal healthcare, which I
Right.
think is so ridiculous. They'll say it's like socialism, like that's what
Mhm.
Bernie Sanders ran on universal healthcare, and they're saying it's socialist. Oh, it's too big government, and it's like most countries have a form of universal healthcare. Like
Mhm.
not even socialist countries, like where I live in Canada, it's not a socialist country, highly capitalistic country. We have universal health care, even though it's actually implemented by a socialist first in Saskatchewan. That was how it was first implemented. It's always the socialists who like first call for like the good ideas, and then only after like 99% of people support them. Well, not 99, but like after like a lot of people support them, suddenly
Yeah.
the federal government will adopt it because it has to.
Yeah. That's
But
what's getting me. Like these same people would be protesting against an 8-hour workday if we were back and protesting against child labor laws because it's going to affect whoever was the Jeff Bezos at the time's bottom line. It's like no, like it just it doesn't make any sense, and it makes me wonder why people are so attached to these ideologies that by all accounts are against their own self-interest. And I mean, it must be like you said, like this something that's programmed in them, or just like willful ignorance of what's going on. Because, like,
definitely
I don't
that.
know, dude. I'm on Reddit and I see this subreddit always pops up. Herman Cain's subreddit or whatever, the Herman Cain Award, and these are
Oh my
people
god, I
who's like,
hate Herman
bro.
Cain.
So some
So
like
dumb.
I'll see some of these where this woman's like it shows this guy's like Facebook posting anti-vax memes like I won't get the vaccine, then they die, right? And then it'll show their wife, it'll show
That's sad.
their spouse post on Facebook, be like, yeah, or heaven gained a new angel, but I'm still not getting vaccinated. Like my husband just fucking died from COVID, but I'm glad we didn't get vaccinated because this is what God wanted. And I'm like like imagine the mental gymnastics, like even at that point, to not be able to be like, holy shit, we fucked up. Like my husband could have been alive right now if I just got vaccinated. Like I don't know, that's just baffling to me.
Yeah, it's funny because their fear they'll be looking at something. Okay, the whole if one is seriously skeptical about big pharma, and most of these people really aren't. They're just more just fearful for the sake of it. There are some real like skeptics, but for the vast majority, a lot of people like this has just been really highly politicized event,
Exactly.
and
And I think a true
and
skeptic would admit when they're obviously wrong. Like this whole myocarditis thing with the vaccine, like, yes, that can happen, but
it
myocarditis happens much higher rates if you get COVID. So, like,
yeah.
what does your skepticism mean when it's if you get the vaccine, you're at a way lower risk of this one random side effect? And people like have this kind of aha moment reaction when there's like a single person who gets some vaccine from the a side effect from the vaccine, and it's like, do people not realize when you get the vaccine, you sign a fucking paper that says like you might die? Like everybody knows medicine has side effects. The problem is it's a risk reward. issue. It's
And we've
not,
been
you
taking
know.
vaccines for like ages. That's the thing is we take also most schools make certain vaccines mandatory. You
Yeah,
know,
100%.
smallpox stuff, all sort of other vaccines. You know, the thing
Yeah.
is also with people talking about it's government conspiracy, whatever. We have all sort of laws that are kind of arbitrary but there for safety. Like you don't see people talking about street lights and
Seatbelts.
seat belts, all sort of stuff like that. We have all
Dude,
these
but
like
I do have a friend who has never been vaccinated, and I respect his decision. Like, I'm not like, dude, what are you talking about? Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's respectable. Like, if you're that committed, like,
if he's
you know,
careful in other
that's
ways. Like
different.
if someone is like not vaccinated but they still kind of are like social distance and
No, like,
wear masks
never.
and whatever.
No, 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 no. I mean, no vaccines in his entire life. Like, this dude has been
Oh,
anti.
geez.
This dude has been anti-vax from the jump,
So
and
he's an
that's like, all
OG
right, man. This is just how you live. Like, I'm not going to criticize someone for that, but if you're all of a sudden anti-vax based on some stupid ass
political
Facebook
event.
memes, like, you're just being sucked into this. Like, it's completely political,
Yeah,
and
like and
it's sad.
a lot of the people who are influencers and promote like anti-vax stuff, like sort of quote unquote skepticism, a lot of them
Are
actually are
vaccinated.
vaccinated. Yeah,
Yeah,
like Tucker
honestly.
Carlson and all those people, like
Well,
they're
Fox
actually
News has
vaccinated.
they have a vaccine mandate, don't they?
Yeah, they
And this is the
do.
other thing, like, private
They're against the
businesses,
mandates, but they have one
yeah.
in their own thing. It's
And
ridiculous.
people are like boycotting companies that have vaccine mandates. It's like, I thought you were in favor of private businesses deciding what it
Yeah, it's like
is.
that's capitalism. Like, I don't, that's the free market. I don't know why people
It's
are
the free
talking about.
market, guys. Come on.
But
It's, it's
it's
frustrating.
and here's the thing. It's also if one is to show skepticism of big pharma, right? Now, and I can here's I think the most logical way to go about it. Okay, people are they're profit driven. They might be driven to produce a sort of vaccine that is a little rushed. Um, that is like a certain skepticism one could have. I mean, one of the things the left has criticized big pharma for years is when um, because often these big companies like Moderna and Pfizer, they would be very reluctant to create
Hmm.
antibiotics and vaccines ahead of time before pandemics broke out or
Hmm.
before like something became a problem because it wasn't profitable. If something wasn't profitable, they would invest in it. That's why I'm actually against privatizing any of this stuff. Like, I don't think this should be in the hands of corporations at all. It makes no sense. Why should this be left to profit motive? So I understand the skepticism there. I can totally get that. But why don't these people who are supposedly critical, why don't they actually apply this criticism of the profit motive to the fucking
To
entire
anything
economy?
else.
Yeah, literally, like
Yeah.
especially healthcare. I mean, because you hear a
Yeah.
lot of this, the same people who are anti-vax or whatever, they're also like very anti-socialism. They don't usually know what it is, and yeah,
Well, the
I saw
vaccine mandate is socialism.
yeah, socialism is when the government does stuff, and the more
Yeah,
stuff it, or even though it's not the government,
it's not.
like it's
But
made by a
I
private
mean,
company.
the vaccines are free, right? So I'm assuming the government pays for
Yeah,
them
it's paying for
to be
them, but
free.
it's like, yeah, that's just that's common sense.
Dude, and one thing I want to say before we go off the issue about privatizing vaccines is like this whole idea of like anti-vaxxers causing these future waves and these future outbreaks of new strains just
Yeah,
makes absolutely no sense when you realize that most of the world isn't vaccinated. So if we don't supply the vaccine to others, if that's the logic, like unvaccinated people are causing COVID to continue. Well, since we're a global society, if we don't vaccinate all of the world by that logic, then we will just keep having new waves because there are countries where, you know, 70% of people aren't vaccinated. So it does, it's such like a single-minded approach to say like, okay, America is going to get vaccinated and then we're going to be good. Like
yeah,
that.
and I also want to, yeah, that's a very important point because the thing is, it's not even just vaccines that prevent the rise of COVID. I mean, the social distancing and the masks plays like an equally important role, arguably more important role, honestly, because
It's the
that's the thing.
spread.
Like, yeah, because the good thing about vaccines, right? You can still get COVID, but it'll be like a bad cold. like a really
Yeah.
bad cold, but you won't like die unless you're really bad health if you've had the vaccine. Because I've known
Right.
so many people who got COVID and they are vaccinated, and they're, they got a lot of problems and often sometimes like kind of fatigue and stuff, but they didn't die, which is, that's the good thing, right, about vaccines. But that still doesn't prevent the spread of the virus and potential new variants, which
Yeah.
is where the masks are important. And this is the thing. I can The anti-vaxxers are one thing, right? But the people that piss me off the most are the anti-maskers, because there's no risk with that. Like there's absolutely no risk in
What do
wearing a
you mean? What
mask.
if I breathe in carbon from the mask and I choke to death? Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
the thing I do understand about anti-maskers is that the messaging on that was very backwards. At first saying masks don't work, and then they do work. Then Fauci's email came
Oh,
out where
the
like
PR was a disaster.
so dumb,
The
and
government
it
PR
just
in
gives them
general is a
ammo.
disaster.
Yeah,
Don't
that was unfortunate.
The
But
government
yeah,
PR was a total disaster. But I mean, an interesting like fact, right, is Vietnam does not have a vaccine mandate and has a much lower rate of COVID than the United States or Canada or the UK.
mm,
Uh, and it has an 80% vaccination rate. It's
wow,
lower.
really.
It's lower, and that's for a large part because of
But is
access. They
it
don't have.
cultural though?
Well, not so. This is the thing. Culture, I think, might play with the mask part. The reason why they have a really good they have a low rate of COVID is because people, number one, respect the lockdown, and they also have a good policy of the lockdown, is they don't allow people to starve. They hand out money and food. So like when the for example, there's all sort of images, you can probably find them if you look it up, but Vietnam was distributing like they got the military to distribute food to the poorest populations during the lockdown, and it was like
Hmm.
not even, they looked pretty good, to be honest. Like it was like bento boxes
I'm
or like
down. Sign me up, man.
Vietnamese version of bento boxes. Anyway, there's like better ways to
Hey,
do lockdowns
well,
that
we
don't
got our
hit.
military here to assault protesters during the lockdown, so that's
Yeah.
that's equal, right?
america
That's the
america
American
used
version.
America uses its army to destroy Vietnam, and Vietnam uses its military to feed its people.
That's beautiful, man. That's capitalism. That's the dream, the American dream, right there. I
But
think that for me, like in that moment, it was just like this whole illusion of freedom was really shattered to see these tanks like rolling through the street, um, and I just think that whole moment in time is just wild. Like I'm really curious to see how that it's going to
you mean
be.
like the BLM protests and all of that?
Yeah, mostly the BLM protests. How that's going to be remembered in history, especially because 90% of them were peaceful, and those couple
Yeah,
cities
totally.
that were burned down. I mean, I'm not going to say there weren't cities that were rocked by um, riots, but realistically, there's only a couple. Like that happened in Minneapolis. That happened in
Yeah, and it's like we look at the source
one
of
or
the
two
riots, right?
places.
Like you have the MLK quote, which is like riots are the voice of the unheard. They don't come out of nowhere, right? So it's a very deep seated anger. Like George Floyd was really just like the signifier case that kind of rallied up into pre-existing anger. It's not
Mhm.
like it was just him. Like that's happened so many times. Like but before George Floyd, there and still to this day, like there's people dying from police, getting assaulted by police, and also just unjustly sentenced for crimes for like smoking
Yeah.
weed or really
Right.
petty crimes, all sort of arbitrary stuff. So people protesting that, I mean,
Yeah.
like of course there's going to be riots. Like that's the thing, is that some people, I see that as inevitable. That's going to be the case, and you deal with that obviously. You can do it two ways. You can do what Lyndon B. Johnson did, which is, Lyndon B. Johnson was a racist, by the way. He wasn't like a nice guy, but he passed the Civil Rights Act because to kind of quell the protests.
Right. Right. Like his hand was
Um,
completely forced.
yeah, so you can do that and actually like do something nice, or you can do the Richard Nixon route, which is what Trump did, and basically arm up the military and fucking
Yeah.
decimate
Shoot him.
people. Yeah,
Do
just
you
full
think?
authoritarianism.
What do you think about like when this was happening? I was kind of starting my page and my channel, and obviously I was doing a lot of research on this and talking about this a lot. And Something that came up for me, like my immediate takeaway was like police brutality is a problem whether you're black or not. And this isn't about to be some like all lives matter shit, but I do think it's
I hope not.
unfortunate. No, but like I do think it sucks that we can't just collectively say like police brutality is a problem that we should all care about, because the all lives matter isn't in
It's not a good messaging
no, but
because
they're not. Yeah, the Black Lives Matter in this case, I don't think is good messaging. But the All Lives Matter
I know I
isn't
actually
saying
agree, but I'm
let's
not sure
let's
for
uh, let's shut down. Sorry, the All Lives Matter is not saying like we need to address police brutality. They're saying like shut the fuck up about police brutality
yeah,
over there.
exactly. 'Cause they're
But
not saying like
I,
they're not saying that, oh, there's non-black people who also get sentenced to unjust sentences for petty crimes. They're not saying
or
that.
just
They're more
shot for no reason by cops.
yeah,
Like,
like I actually for what it's worth, I know a person, a non-black person who I was I don't know if I should get into it, but like I've witnessed police brutality before, not on
yeah,
me, but I've witnessed it. Um,
right.
but the thing is, and it does, like, their race plays a huge role because they're more likely to be
It does.
biased against black people. Like that's why it's just statistically more likely.
Yeah, I'm
But
not
there's
debating that at
but like a
all.
big
I'm just saying we
problem.
should all be coming together on this
Yeah,
issue,
no, I agree with
knowing
you.
that it disproportionately affects minorities, but in general, like there's plenty of white people who get shot and
It's
they
true.
should be
Yeah,
on board, is what I'm saying. I'm not saying like
exactly.
we
Yeah.
should be
No, I
like
know what you're
all lives,
saying.
you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Yeah.
I know. Yeah, no, I totally agree. Is this thing boils down a very deep thing, right? A lot of it is just the way that the police are kind of trained. Police
Yep.
are sort of trained in a very authoritarian way, and they're also armed way too much. I mean, a big realization for me was when I went to Japan, because when I went to Japan, I saw police, and it was just completely different from Canada and the U.S., where I've been many times. Uh, in the U.S. and in Canada, U.S. a little bit more extreme, but it's pretty bad here too. Is the police are kind of like soldiers almost. They're like armed to the teeth.
Hmm.
They're armed.
Yeah,
They're
they're ready to
literally,
kill.
yeah, they're like stormtroopers, for fuck's sake.
Yeah.
Whereas you see, when I went to Japan, the police didn't even have guns. Literally no guns. They had batons. That was it.
Hmm.
And Japan has a very low crime rate. I mean, some could say that's cultural or whatever, but I mean, there's a huge correlation in general. Plenty of studies done about number one, that there isn't a correlation between tougher on crime policies and a reduction in crime. Like that doesn't work. The sort of policies that Nixon started and Reagan and Clinton
Right.
increased,
Because
which
it doesn't prevent crime. It
gets at the
catches.
symptom.
It, yeah, it gets at the symptom. The cause of crime is not, uh, like that's like police officers are there after the fact to give the ramification, but criminals are gonna do what they like. They're not doing crime like on a whim for fun. Like they're doing it because they're surviving, right? So it's a rational choice.
Yeah, I wrote a paper on drug decriminalization and criminalization back in the university, and it's really where I was pretty surprised to show that, wow, it's like these policies about giving higher sentences for petty crimes, drug crime, all sort of stuff like this, worsening prison conditions, increasing the surveillance police power. This does not increase crime at all. If anything, it kind of see, like, it kind of actually got worse in the 2000s, and it's because it's not even correlated. Um,
Yeah.
it doesn't help at all. But you do see correlations between decreases in poverty and crime. I mean, that's just
Yeah.
obvious.
No, dude, I was
Yeah.
researching this yesterday. Countries with the most income inequality have the most crime, and when you look at just like let's say Western countries, the U.S. has the most income inequality and also has the most crime. Obviously, like we have guns here, and most places in Europe do not. Like the average person doesn't have a gun, right? But there's plenty of other crimes that are, so it's about the cause, and I feel like the police are just there to like give a heavy-handed punishment and throw the undesirables where they belong, out of sight, out of mind, into the prisons.
Yeah, exactly. And you can't. This is so perfectly exemplified by Russia, because Russia actually had a very, very low crime rate during the days of the Soviet Union. And yeah, I know a lot of people have very conflicting views on the Soviet Union, especially in the United States. People are taught all sort of crazy stuff
I'm
about them.
Russian, by the way, if that helps. Like I speak fluent Russian.
Interesting. Oh,
Yeah.
that's so sick. And now there's a lot of this is not to like romanticize or anything, because a lot of people even don't even agree that they're socialists, and people can understand the authoritarianism and whatnot. Uh, but it got better in the Gorbachev years. But a lot of it, bureaucracy, all sort of problems. But they had basic health care, full employment. They had all sort of stuff that they just don't have today. After the fall of the Soviet Union, you saw really drastic increases in crime, really, really bad increases in crime. And I mean, it just shows that giving people a fucking livelihood, like affordable homes and housing, which other countries have done. Like Finland still has this. There's many ways to deal with this. Um, that can reduce poverty significantly. And when you suddenly reduce opportunities for people and just basic rights, people will they'll put food on the table in a different way, and they'll often turn
Right.
towards legal means. Like Russia, I think right now, I believe like over 50% of the economy is actually in the black market, or over 50% of the GDP rather, it comes from the
Wow.
black market, which is just staggering,
That's
right?
insane. And they're also the number 2 incarcerator after the United States. So we're number
Yeah,
1 in incarcerations per 100,000, and Russia, I believe, is like just behind us. So
the US is
that's pretty
number one.
shocking, dude. I
And
kind of
also
feel like most people don't know that. Like
and it has the
it's stuff
second
like that.
highest inequality in the world too. Russia, like after India, I think it has the second highest
Mm,
inequality. I believe it depends how you measure it, like by wealth or income, but it's definitely up there. So
yeah,
there is, like you said, there's a correlation between inequality and crime. I mean, Brazil, fuck. Like
yeah.
this is the thing I really came to notice this when I went to different Latin American countries. Is like Brazil and Mexico really have some insane levels of crime, and they're very deeply unequal. I've been to Cuba, which is really now struggling with the embargo and sanctions and all that stuff.
Mhm.
But when I went back in the Obama years, when there was like a lessening on the embargo, like you could actually travel there and spend money there. To be honest, like I was able to go outside the city and actually visit people, and it was very safe. And
Mm.
it was like normal. It felt like a normal country. Whereas in Mexico and you can't, in Dominican Republic, places like that, you can't go outside the resorts. It's often very
Oh
risky.
yeah, yeah,
Like it's
yeah,
very dangerous.
for
Whereas like
sure.
Cuba is fairly safe. I mean, just
Yeah.
that shows you like you don't need to have like one doesn't have to like certain things like centralized bureaucracy and whatnot, but like it's clear that stuff like basic universal healthcare, good education, giving people jobs, stuff like that just works. Stuff like
Yeah.
that, and all sort of other countries have had that too. Obviously still like people like to point to the Scandinavian countries.
Mhm.
They have their problems as well, but they also kind of figured this out too, is with these basic programs can do a hell of a lot to
Right. We all
alleviate
benefit, right?
poverty.
We all benefit. It's less wasteful. Even if there is more bureaucracy,
No, there
like
doesn't even have to be more
investing.
bureaucracy. I think that's more of a consequence, because like the reason why there's a lot of bureaucracy in like the Soviet Union and Cuba is because they were like so under attack from the get-go that they developed like this centralized structure. This is really oversimplifying, by the way. It's like very complicated history, but they developed like this huge
Yeah.
bureaucracy in response to this, and it just got bigger and became kind of a class of its own, sort of like an upper class of sorts. But I think
Yeah.
you can definitely have like healthcare and all that stuff without bureaucracy, because we have bureaucracy now in a capitalist system. Like you see,
Mhm.
like the private healthcare, you have to go through like
Oh
multiple
yeah, no,
middlemen.
it's
There's all sort of
insurance companies
yeah.
and everything. Yeah, I think where I was going was like to solve the homelessness crisis, for example, would be like cheaper than dealing with all the issues that stem from that, and also just make everyone's life better. Or even like the healthcare system, giving people government insurance or subsidizing insurance like that would save the government money at the end of the day, but we still don't do it. Like there's this fear, I think, especially on the right, that like on the left, I think in broad strokes, we can say we want um, people to have equal opportunities. Um, like we want things to be fair, let's just say. On the right, fairness for them is defined as I work for what I get, and my hard work does not contribute to anyone else who didn't potentially work for what they get. So I think like we have these two where everyone is kind of acting in a way they feel is just, right? Like my definition of fairness versus someone who's on the right who's like very much like bootstraps, like I worked for what I got and you should do the same, and it would be oppression for me to share the fruits of my labor with you through any government programs, because you might not have worked as hard, and that's not fair. So I just, I understand those two viewpoints, but at the end of the day, we all benefit from social programs. If there's less homeless people on the street, we all benefit if there's less crime. So just like I feel like that other position is kind of counterintuitive.
Oh yeah, 100%. And that's the thing that you see talked a lot about. Like I would say here's the thing with probably the hip hop community is there is like a lack of politics in the hip hop community, and lack of kind of talking about social awareness. But I would say if there's one thing that is vocal in like hip hop music, especially older hip hop music, but it's kind of resurrecting, is like abolitionism and
Yeah.
the kind of awareness about crime and stuff. I just wish this was a little bit more tied to the economic aspect, because you have people like Jay-Z who will speak out about incarcerations, police brutality, but I mean he'll do this by help. He does help a lot. Like he'll help with cases and people who are tried for petty crimes and stuff. He'll pay for lawyers and all that stuff, but it doesn't talk about like a lot of the economic
That's not a
causes of
systemic
inequality.
solution, though.
Yeah,
Just,
yeah, exactly.
that's
Whereas
like
you
going
have
up to
people who
someone on
do.
the street and being like, "Okay, you're black. Here's $10. That's reparations." Like that's not addressing any actual issues. Like I don't
Yeah,
know
I
if you
mean,
saw the Channel 5 video, Andrew Callahan, where they went to the reparations rally. It's pretty interesting. They basically like confront all these white liberals, and they're like, "Yeah, so you're here to protest for reparations, right?" And then the white people are like, "Yeah," and then he's like, "All right, can you give me $10?" And then they're just like, "Here you go." And it's so cringe, man. Like I don't know, it's so misguided.
yeah, I know what you
I
mean.
mean, I do think reparations are something that needs to happen, but for me, like any kind of attempt to address economic inequality should not be based on race. And here's why, at least in my opinion, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this too, because I've been thinking about this a lot. If we were to give the bottom 20% of Americans some kind of economic boost, that would inherently benefit minorities the most and white people the least because of the racial
Well, it
wealth
benefit
gap.
white people too. It just would benefit
It
rich
would.
people the least. Yeah.
No, but I'm saying like
Out of the groups,
proportionally, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Obviously, it would
yeah.
benefit white people the most because there's the most white people, like in some, but proportionally, like this would already, and there would be political support for something like this. But when the left is going to go and say, like, okay, let's give $10,000 to every black person, of course, that will never happen. And so part of me just feels like the reason something like that hasn't been proposed is like because the Democrats don't even want that. Like they are beholden to, they don't want to actually materially change people's lives. They want to talk about,
They don't want
these,
anything that
yeah,
actually threatens like the system. So,
the corporate structure.
I think like things like a basic income, and even more so like a federal job guarantee would really, really help like marginalized communities who statistically find the hardest time through employment, getting employment. So, that would be huge, right?
I mean,
No,
federal was like the
conservatives
first.
will. conservatives will
Yeah.
often say like, "Oh, you're struggling minority, whatever. Just get a job." And it's like,
Mhm.
okay, anyone who's been in a rut of unemployment or who just doesn't have that much experience would know how hard it is to actually find jobs. Because when you actually apply to one, they're like, "Oh, what is your experience?" You can
Right.
be like 12 and apply for a job, and they'll be like, "What is your experience? Go get some experience." It's
Yeah.
really hard out there, you know. Like, and a
It
lot of the
is.
time, at least the places I've worked, to be honest, like most of the people who worked there were from connections.
Mhm.
It's pure luck. Like this whole job system sometimes is so like where it should be. We want to talk about equality of opportunity. You know, that's the thing liberals love to talk about. Whereas conservatives usually don't hide their distaste for poor people. They're pretty upfront. They don't care. Liberals will say, "Oh, we believe in economic opportunity." Okay, sure, guarantee people jobs. Then, you know,
Right.
even someone like Killer Mike, like he supports stuff like that, which is why I
Mhm.
even like he has some weird takes sometimes. But Killer Mike, Killer Mike,
He's like
I think,
Southern. He's like very. Oh wait, where's he from? Atlanta,
yeah, he is Georgia, Atlanta, and
Georgia. Yeah.
he I think he had some good politics for a while. Like, I mean, he at least for the music industry. And
Yeah.
I think he was pretty big on the Bernie Sanders campaign, especially he
Yeah.
really liked, I know, the job guarantee. He was a big supporter of that.
Yeah. No, that's been really important. I remember when I was reading about the racial wealth gap. One of the first kind of paths to out of poverty for a lot of black people was federal jobs because one, discrimination was federally illegal. I think before it was like on a state basis. Um, or I'm not sure about that, but it was like one of the first pathways. And also there was a guaranteed minimum wage, which was really important. So I think that would be an incredible program. And I think my point was that not that like I'm against reparations, but I almost feel like making these programs or these kind of like social programs specific to race, which kind of has been a trend in the Democratic Party, just sets them up for failure. If we could all as a country come together and be like, okay, oppression of minorities has been a thing for a long time and still continues. Let's try to fix that. I wish that was the case, but I just think realistically it's not. And the Democrats need to think more strategically. And it just makes me wonder at this point, like, are they doing it on purpose? Like they're, like they're setting this all up for failure, and just
Yeah,
kind
that's
of sucks, man.
it is kind of, it is both on purpose and also kind of ineptitude. A bit, but like the big part about on purpose. I mean, I have a whole video on that. Without obviously, I know we wanted to get into hip hop, so I won't go into too much about the Democrats. But I would link a video. I have
Yeah.
one called "Why Billionaires Prefer Democrats."
Oh,
It's a
dude, I love that
controversial
one. That
title.
was great.
Yeah, it's
No,
a
that was really
controversial
good.
video. Thanks. Yeah, and it's that really like boils down the structural role that Democrats historically
Mhm.
played.
Yeah.
The thing is, it's even worse now. Like, I would say before they actually did kind of look out for the long-term interests of the system by giving people what they want, whereas now it's got to a point where it's more like the Democrats just keep moving economically to the right. You could say
Yeah.
maybe they stopped moving to the right recently, but they've been moving to the right really since the 1990s, like dramatically, to the point where they just kind of become the Republicans, the old Republicans, and the new
Yeah.
Republicans now are just something else. They're just like a party of lunatics, like
Right.
a total far right like party of lunatics that is totally incompetent.
Well,
But
isn't
it's
that
yeah,
this is actually what I wanted to ask you about. This is the last thing on politics before we talk about hip hop at least a little bit,
sure.
but like by moving that like goalpost further to the right, like that plays into this like Democrats are the lesser evil ideology, which is like the only reason a lot of people like me voted Democrat for our entire lives. Like, this is actually something I wanted to mention even before we started this conversation. But like, in 2016, I had the first opportunity to vote, or yeah, that would be my first election, right? Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton. Like, I wasn't like super hype on Hillary, but I had no choice, right? I felt like democracy was under fire from the right, and Then in 2020, again, I had to vote for Joe Biden. And I kind of feel like now that was a mistake on my part because it enables the Democratic Party to continue getting away with this because, you know what I mean? Like, let's say a bunch of young people just didn't vote, then they would be forced to switch something up. But because they can keep pointing to the right and saying, like, do you really want that guy leading you? You better vote for us. And like, most normal people are like, yeah, all right, like, what am I going to do? And now, like you just said, the right has now turned into like this party of lunacy. So now it's even easier to say like, look at these guys. Like, are you really going to vote for them? But at the same time, like, I don't want to just give my vote because I feel like I have to like, you know what I mean? Like, I almost feel like gross doing it. And I've done it twice. 2 out of 2 elections, I felt like I was forced to vote for the candidate that I didn't even like or believe in anything that they believed in. And I kind of feel like I don't want to do that again. And obviously that's going to happen again. And like, what is your opinion on that? Like, is it politically smart to abstain? Like, or like, do you think you should still vote for the lesser of two evils and enable this kind of like, you know, shitty behavior?
So I think this is going to be depressing, but I think I
Perfect.
treat it as there isn't really a democracy in the United States. So the thing is people who will say, understandably say, don't vote for Biden, vote for X. It's still like kind of playing the democracy game, like as if there's a choice. Whereas I think it's
Mm,
kind of, I think, yes, I would prefer to have a Democrat in the White House over a Republican. Um, so I can get people who are like in a swing state, especially if people are in a swing state where it
yeah,
can really go either way.
no
I would
question
definitely,
there.
I probably would vote Democrat for sure if I was in a swing state. But if
I
I
am
was like,
not. So
yeah,
that
if I was in California, I would probably vote for the Greens or. But like the thing is, this is the thing. Like vote in general, this doesn't really matter in the U.S. because the way this party system in the U.S. is like it's structured so the Greens or any third party for that matter can't really ever. It's impossible
right. Yeah.
for them because they won't get platformed by the media. They
Hmm.
won't. It's really hard because of the proportional voting to actually get a seat in Congress. You need like a
Hmm.
very large. It's just really problematic.
Yeah.
Whereas you have parliamentary systems that are multi-party systems like Italy, France, Portugal. You have like you see like all sort of parties. Like I don't know, not to say those systems are perfect
Yeah.
either. I don't really think like democracy. I don't think has been really done perfect or even excellently anywhere.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, we don't even have a party that represents the rights of working people
Yeah.
or their voices. Like, we only have the voices of corporations running our government, which leads to atrocities like the prison industrial complex and private prisons and our medical system. And I just, it's so frustrating that people can't even like be like, yes, this is wrong. This is a problem. Like, there's so much of the country that's not even conscious, or even if they you told them, they would just be like, fuck it, like that's the way it is, and it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, and also this is the thing too is like also most countries, especially in Europe, or not even just Europe, but like Latin America, will have far more parties that have a possibility of actually winning. Because the United States, like this is the thing,
Right.
the United like there's tiers to democracy. There's like levels to it, okay? Like
Yeah.
Canada is less democratic than let's say Portugal or France just because of proportional voting. The US is just straight up I think, it's like a dictatorship where with two parties where two people take turns. The thing in
Right.
America that people construe with democracy is liberty. Where
Hmm.
what America might have that a country like North Korea doesn't is that America has civil liberties to a degree, right? So you can like criticize the government, but you can't actually like you can criticize the government. You can say what you want. You have freedom of speech, but you can't actually. There's no opportunity to actually influence the government.
Hmm.
It's really hard to become part of like the corporate elite. It's very hard, or to form
Well,
another
you just need
party.
a lot of money, right?
Yeah, yeah, you just casually have to have a couple
Yeah.
billionaires like you. Like
That's
that's the way to win. I mean, you can like go far to a certain extent with like the Bernie Sanders approach and get tons of grassroots funding. Like he got lots of funding from regular people, just millions of donations from like small donations
Right.
from regular people. And the
And
thing
you'll
is
still
that,
lose.
yeah, and like this the thing, right, is with US so-called democracy, you'll have the media just
The media.
completely piles on anyone who poses a threat. That, and also one interesting fact, America is one of the I think the only so-called democracy that counts its votes digitally.
Hmm.
And that's not a good thing. Counting your votes digitally just makes it very easy to rig elections. Whereas there's a reason why people traditionally in most countries count votes via like a collected ballot, like a paper ballot. It's a lot harder
Okay.
to rig an election that way. With electronically, it's very there's a lot of room for error there. I mean, and we saw certain elections in the Bernie Sanders primaries, the Democratic primaries of 2022, where there was straight up election rigging. I mean, some of them aren't secrets. There's some conspiracies about like certain other states, but like Iowa, for example, the first state that Bernie basically won in, they suddenly
Hmm.
stopped counting the votes right when he was winning. And then they said, oh, they're tied. And then the votes were being counted by an app owned by Pete Buttigieg's campaign manager. I mean, how is
Hmm.
that legal? How is a private entity able to count votes? How is this
Wasn't
outsourced?
that because I was actually like tracking votes for that election. I was working for a news company or interning. Um, what didn't they stop counting the votes because they didn't want it to look like Bernie was winning like in that moment in time? Because they saw Bernie was winning and there was still hours until the vote would stop. So they were like, all right, we're just gonna like not show, but then at the end they still were like Bernie won,
That actually, I think the Iowa never really got decided, although he basically won
Really?
in the eyes of the public. But yeah, no, I don't think that one really got decided until like Biden
Huh.
already won.
Because I remember
But
how
like
that happening in real
even
time, and
yeah,
people were
like
like, "Bernie takes the lead," and then it was like, "Okay, we're not showing the result
yeah,
anymore."
yeah, and also you had you had the other one. What's it called? Jesus, I totally forgot. Geez. No, but California, I mean, that was a state he won handedly, and then they just like
Mhm.
for some reason took forever to count the votes for that one. They didn't finally decide till like the election was over.
Mm.
It's like all the states he's winning on, which are like the first three or
Right.
first five, they suddenly like don't count. Whereas Biden, South Carolina, oh, suddenly all the votes are counted. And also, here's
Mhm.
the thing: I don't want to. I'm always skeptical. I had to make conclusions. You don't want to be like the anti-vaxxers to make jump to conclusions. So like I don't like definitively say like the whole election was rigged, but there was undoubtedly
There
influence
was a
because,
bias against him, obviously,
well,
just
that's
like there is a
undeniable.
bias against Trump in the
But
media
like
as
the
well.
thing is, look, the Republican Party didn't do voter suppression to stop Trump, whereas they literally closed down entire polls to stop Bernie Sanders in the primaries, like really
Mhm.
draconian stuff. They also kept stations, voting stations that were in elderly areas near old folks' home longer the most, and the ones near universities they closed down around 6 p.m., which is insanity. And also. Um, Now here's when you get into the more conspiratorial bit if you'd like to, but I don't like to jump
Definitely.
to the conclusion. But okay, here's like a little weird statistic. Joe Biden got more black votes than Obama did. Do you believe that
Mm.
for a second?
I don't know.
Yeah, and also the elections
It's
of
just such a different. People are more politically awakened. I don't know, man. That's
Biden's the guy. Yeah, I mean that's what they said. They said that, oh, more people just went out to vote because of the more people went out to vote. But I don't believe that for a second. Like Obama, especially in the first election, like there's a lot of people who believed in Obama even if they didn't in the
that's true.
second. Especially because he was like the first black president.
Is
Uh,
there evidence though? Like
Obama,
that's the thing is for me is like
Obama.
people can always say this kind of shit, right? Like
Well, that's the thing. They're like, it's not clear. That's why I would be much more certain if there was,
mm,
but it's more one of those like weird, questionable things. And also,
mm,
yeah, so the kind of getting more votes than Obama. Like this is the guy who says poor kids are just as smart as white kids.
right, right, right. Yeah, that was bad, man. That was
Yeah,
that was
he says
horrible.
all sort of like
What
southern
about the
racist.
"you're not black" thing? All that.
Oh man, he has so many Freudian slips,
Not
like
to mention, he
like race.
literally argued in favor of segregation not
He
that long
did, yeah.
ago,
Yeah,
and
we
argued
supposed to.
against gay marriage not that long ago. I mean, look, we all know
And
who Joe
he
Biden
literally
is.
implemented the crime policies that in the
Yeah,
Clinton era that
Bill
locked up,
Clinton.
yeah, so many black people. So
Well, those
it's
policies were even worse than like those locked up more black people than Reagan and or sorry
yeah,
Nixon's policies.
it was an acceleration of Reagan and Nixon's policies. So it was like a doubling down of it. No,
Yep.
it was totally insane, totally stupid policy. Yeah, it's
Well, you got to get
insanity.
those white people to vote for you somehow, right?
But anyway, you to get more to your question, I don't. So the thing is America is a very difficult question for me because for me, in a lot of countries, like even in Canada, I still have hopes that it's kind of possible to elect socialism, but it's more questions what you do after that, or like
Mm-hmm.
social democracy. You know, at the very least, social democracy I think is possible. Uh,
Yeah.
and it's how you it's more what you do after that that I think is the bigger obstacle. But in America,
Yeah.
I really have trouble with this because I can't even I don't know if I can call America democracy
Yeah.
just even in a political way because I mean
Mm-hmm.
it's really just it's a difficult thing. So and the thing is America has like a long history of revolutions, a very long history of revolutions, not just the American Revolution. At one point, states were going to war with each other, all kind of stuff. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's
Yeah.
American history is wild. I recommend people read People's History of the United States by Howard
Yep.
Zinn.
I'm reading that right now.
It's so good. It's so good.
Yeah,
It's
man, it's
American
great.
history is wild. Like let's just say
It
that.
is. It's fucking
And
wild.
so the thing was, I would say what's more important right now than just the voting is organizing, and also getting out the thought. Like I think we need like the left needs PR. We need to get messages, to get
Yeah.
conversations, to sort of politicize things like mental health, work, and also get people thinking about like alternative things to the sort of system we have, like alternative
When you say the
ways of
left, do you
living.
mean Democrats, like the party,
No,
or
not at all.
okay,
So I mean like
okay,
the left, I mean like that's actually
yeah.
explicitly the anti-democrat left.
Right.
Like what I mean
Okay.
is so you could I consider the left to be anything from like Bernie Sanders, AOC, and that's the moderate, right? Because like people like Bernie and AOC are sort of like would be a centrist center left party in most European countries. Like many countries have
Yeah.
actually had socialist presidents in Europe. In Europe, saying a socialist is like you're a Democrat, whereas
Right.
like a communist is like you're like a hardcore socialist. In Europe, socialist is not very radical. Like France had two socialist presidents, you know, most notably François Mitterrand, basically like a Bernie Sanders.
Wow. That's some nice
Um,
pronunciation there.
I speak French. That's why.
Oh,
'Cause
really?
yeah, because
That's cool, man.
Canada is sort of like a bilingual
Oh,
country.
obvious.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I used to speak French fluently too. Actually, I lived in Paris for when I was like a really young for a couple of years. So I knew French and then I forgot it immediately. But I can
Nice.
understand, like the words are in there, but I can't like remember them. I
Yeah,
guess.
the vocab. Yeah, I get that. Yeah,
But
I
yeah,
get
I was
that.
speaking it
But
fluently for like 3 years, so it's there somewhere.
yeah, and then Portugal has like a socialist president right now who just won a
Mhm.
majority. There's plenty
Oh
in
yeah,
South
yeah.
America. Yeah, so like it's not like so I include like the left to be sort of the Bernie Sanders, AOC, all the way to anarchists,
Mhm.
Marxists, Trotskyists, Marxist Leninists, Maoists, all sort of different groups can be part of the left. Uh,
Mm.
you know, there's all sort of I think is the left yeah, like the people like Democrats are not left whatsoever. I mean their ideology is quite explicitly reactionary. Like their economic ideology
Mhm.
is not progressive because one has to be progressive, it has to be like an advanced from the current state, whereas the ideology that the Democrats and the Republicans believe in is neoliberalism, which is basically was the ideology that removed welfare capitalism, which was a system before.
What kind of
it,
capitalism?
welfare capitalism, which is like Keynesianism, people call it that.
Oh.
A more radical version of that would be social democracy, which you get in France,
Mhm.
Sweden, Denmark, countries like that,
Yeah.
Norway. Uh, but
But you're not a
you,
social democrat. You're further left than that, right?
I'm
Like
further left than that.
personally.
Yeah, I used to be a social democrat, but and I'm always happy to see social democrats win. The reason why I'm
Hmm.
not a social democrat is because historically you really only see social democrats democracy implemented in response to more radical movements. And I kind of allude to that in the Why Billionaires Prefer Democrats video. Let's be clear, actually, this not maybe those might be confused. Like social democrat has nothing to do with the Democratic Party. I mean, the Democratic Party was founded by slave owners. It's evolved a lot over the
Yeah.
years. I guess nothing. Social democracy has nothing to do with democratic the Democratic Party. Social democracy is
Hmm.
sort of the idea that you can kind of use the existing system and state to implement
Hmm.
policies that you would normally just get under socialism, like uh, but while keeping the market system. Now, this can work pretty well. The problem with this system is it doesn't actually ever get implemented until its response to more radical movements. Like if you look at the USA, it's really during the Great Depression with Franklin Roosevelt when you got welfare capitalism, like a tame version of it. And it was because you
Hmm.
had the Socialist Party was a lot bigger than the Green Party is today back then. Socialist Party actually had seats at one point, like had a fair amount of votes, and the just in general, labor unions were big, and a lot of people in the labor unions sympathize with various different communist ideologies, ranging from Marxism, Leninism, Orthodox Marxism, Trotskyism, non-affiliated Marxism. Sort of how I define a little bit anyway. Like I'm a non-sectarian Marxist, but not a Marxist
Hmm.
Leninist or a Maoist. Um, and then there's like all these. It was big back then. It was big across the world, and there was change happening everywhere. And in response to this, that's the only way to really get like the reformist candidate, which social democracy is. It's a reformist ideology.
Okay.
You only get that come into power, and the elites, like the rich capitalists, being okay with that. Well, they're usually never okay with that, but they'll tolerate it. They won't back a military coup only if they feel that politician or that movement is the only way to actually keep the system together. Because in the Great Depression, there was a threat of either communism, socialism, fascism, all sort of different movements could have destabilized the system. And Roosevelt was a
Hmm.
way to. Roosevelt was a rich man. He was like a very rich family, and he supported like these radical policies, like for their time anyway, the New Deal that gave Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, a job guarantee. He supported that because quite explicitly to save capitalism. Like he said that explicitly. And you have this also with Francois Mitterrand in France. Came in power in the 1980s, sort of in the aftermath of 1968. There was like France almost had like a mini revolution in 1968. It's pretty famous. Like it basically did have a mini revolution, except and it was almost like the Communist Party who sold out the people. But that's another story. Uh,
Hmm.
but
Wow.
there is like France has been radicalized, was really radicalized in that time, and someone like Mitterrand was sort of like he was basically not very radical for France, but maybe radical for like the United States, or you can also look at Scandinavia. Like Scandinavia had the Soviet Union, right? Scandinavian countries had Soviet Union right next to it. There was
Mm.
the communism was quite literally spreading everywhere, and it was a
Right.
way to give this sort of compromise. So you have this is the thing. Social democracy is a compromise, but you can only have a compromise if there's something to compromise with. And at the stage, why would the if you just have social democracy versus crazy neoliberal capitalism or fascism, why would they compromise? You need to have power. So when there's like a more radical movement, social democracy becomes possible, right? Whereas it's like the
Mm.
opposite now. You have in the 2020 and 2016 elections, Bernie Sanders was predicted as far left, or
Hmm.
not predicted, depicted as far left in the media. He
Right.
was like, he's super far left, blah blah blah, and it's like not at
Yeah.
all. So like we need to get to a point where Bernie Sanders is sort of like the center left candidate.
Right. Yeah, I
And that's
mean,
why I'm not a social democrat. There's many other reasons why I'm not a social democrat.
yeah.
Mainly just because they don't fix like the social relation of exploitation and workplaces. But they
Mhm.
make capitalism like livable. They make it like nicer and better and give people rights. So it's obviously
Right,
much better. I would say yes to social democracy if I was given
right.
the chance for sure. But it's like I'm not a social democrat because you don't really get social democracy by being a social democrat. You get it by being more radical
Mm, mhm.
and that
It's like a
becoming the
concession on the way there.
yeah, exactly.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think I've only really been exposed to a lot of more like further left ideas in the past couple years, especially since my YouTube recommended has kind of improved, and I'm seeing like I've always aligned with these ideas, but I am very skeptical of at least communism um, in the United States for a couple of reasons. And I know at the start you mentioned the like I'm a pretty open-minded person. I don't have like hard concrete ideas about anything. I try to learn from everything I read and people I talk to. Like I'll
Yeah, me
still
too.
read Marxist theory, and I think it's super interesting. And I don't understand this like phobia of it. Like there's a lot of interesting concepts that we should all be at least discussing. But anyways, my concern about moving further left is really just like it's oh yeah, so at the start you kind of mentioned like the human nature argument, and I'm not bringing that into the discussion, but um like human nature as we are right now, like not like saying biologically a thousand, when humans were evolved and how we had to act then, like the United States people in this country right now um are nowhere near ready for something like that. So I do think advocating for social democracy um and just realistically, like that does seem like the best next step for me. um Mainly because like we overall are like very selfish, and whether that's human nature or not, like in this moment, like people wouldn't even get a vaccine to protect others. Like Trump would 1000% have gotten reelected if it wasn't for COVID. Like all these things just kind of signify to me that like the general consciousness is like nowhere near uh, that kind of mentality where they're going to say, okay, like let's redistribute the means of production and have every single person have full value from their labor, because like it just seems like people do want to be better than others and to have that hierarchy. Like I feel like people are not ready to let go of that. I think it would be great if this was we were starting a new society, and I'm not saying we shouldn't strive for that as an ideal, um, but like I just am kind of concerned about like the realistic implementation of that. And if we got there, like wouldn't like I'm concerned about people still being people and implementing hierarchies in that system, even though it would obviously
Well,
be more
you
difficult.
meant you mentioning hierarchy. So it's those two things there. One thing I'll say off the bat is hierarchies is kind of the difference between Marxism and anarchism and social
Mm,
democracy as well. Is anarchy sees the core problem of our systems as hierarchy. Whereas I
okay.
don't really I think they're actually correct, but I'm not an anarchist because I also don't think you can get rid of hierarchy so easily. Whereas I think it's
Mhm.
actually we can get rid of capitalism. I mean, the history shows us this.
Right.
Capitalism has only been around for 300 years, roughly. I mean, it really depends what you consider the period when it started. Because capitalism has been around for
Hmm.
really since the 1500s, but capitalism as a system, like where the dominant system is a capitalist mode of production, where the government has like capitalism as we know didn't come into existence until liberalism came into existence, and that's
Hmm.
really wasn't until Britain in the Industrial Revolution. So like this has been around for just really 300 years. Some might even say less. uh, the system is very short. Now hierarchies has been around for much longer. So
Right.
that's the thing. Whereas I think we can replace capitalism. I,
Hmm.
I don't I don't think we. This is the thing with Marx, right? He doesn't argue for equality of outcome. Marx like really argues for to each according to their ability, to each according to their need. The point is,
Mhm.
it's like right to their ability. So we should have a society that rewards people actually on work. Number one, that's why he proposed a labor voucher system, that people who put more into society can get access to more of the social wealth of society. And that labor voucher is kind of like a replacement for money because it extinguishes it as you use it rather than accumulating it over time like you can with money.
But will we not
And
just end up in the same place if we do
not at
that?
all.
Like instead
Well,
of
I would
money, we
say
have
this is the
this
thing.
not money money.
But
You know what I mean?
okay,
Like,
here's the thing. Didn't people say this in feudalism? Like I'm sure feudalism was around for like much longer than capitalism, like 4,000 years, and
right.
uh, feudalism was. I mean, I'm sure you had people saying like, "Can it never change?" And let's be honest, capitalism, liberal capitalism, is way better
Kind
than
of is
feudalism.
feudalism, though. You know, I mean,
Oh, but it's way better.
conceptually,
Like it's way better. Like for example, in
right?
feudalism, like there was no democracy at all, and you did not have access to like the innovation we have. That's
Hmm.
another thing is like capital. This is the thing. Marx first sees capitalism as like a big progression in society. He's like partially in awe of it and also kind of disgusted by it because capitalism is
Hmm.
simultaneously more brutal than previous systems. You know, especially
Right.
environmentally, it's the unquestionably the most brutal
Unchecked.
systemly, environmentally the worst system ever. But in many
Hmm.
ways, it's super progressive system in other ways. So the thing is with Marx, he sees this as a necessary development. You had under feudalism this aristocracy and a nobility, class of kings, aristocrats, people who are noble, right? And they
Hmm.
had and it was often like divine right. We believe in the divine right of kings. What started to happen is you got merchants. These are like the proto-capitalists trading across the world. And I'm really summarizing here. It's a lot of history, okay?
Oh
but
yeah, I've
uh,
read all
uh,
this, but I appreciate the summary. Like this is
but
super
but
helpful.
you but oh you so you had this emergence of what is like called the bourgeois class,
Right.
which weren't like nobility, but they got like wealthier, and these people started actually with their free time. They had more free time. They started inventing things or developing things like philosophy,
Hmm.
universities, really doing really progressive shit. And eventually, when the
Yeah.
bourgeois class felt themselves more powerful, they pioneered revolutions. First, that failed, by the way. First, there was the first set of bourgeois revolutions in the 1500s and the 1400s that pretty much failed across the board. It's got some concessions in England, but you didn't really have successful bourgeois revolutions until number one, the the English Revolution is called the Glorious Revolution. Stupid name, but that's what it's called. Which kind of is what brought the Parliament in England. And you got the
Hmm.
French Revolution, was like the much more extreme.
Yeah.
In France, you got revolutions across the American Revolution later. So you got like this system. The idea for Marx is that okay, yeah, now you have this new class society, but it's simplified classes into really the bourgeois class and the proletarian class, the working class and the capitalist class, and then the people who are kind of in between, who might own a little bit of capital, but are
Right.
still mostly laborers, which you call the petit bourgeois.
Hmm.
Uh, and this really actually simplifies things. His theory is that because the workers are the working class produces the wealth of society, that they will
Hmm.
eventually get to a point as society advances where they become the dominant class. And after they become the dominant class, which is they will abolish all the classes. When you abolish all the classes is when you get to like quote unquote communism. That's never really been done. There's anarchists who say that they established communism in like Catalonia or Chiapas or some places, but like not really. Like there's small scale, sure, like small scale communism's been done a lot, but like on a large scale,
Yeah.
no system succeeds until it becomes a dominant system. Now you really had like
But
socialism kind of done in
didn't the
countries.
merchants that you just described that essentially became the bourgeoisie or the petty bourgeoisie, they
Yeah, but they made
kind
life
of they
better.
were absorbed into the upper class, and then there were still people being dominated, right? So let's say these workers now become the dominant class. Is there not inherently going to be someone below them, that's just
Well,
going to
yeah, this
continue the
is this is
cycle?
the thing is like there isn't when you have a system overthrown, there's still a classes, but it makes things better, and its class
Okay.
struggle still continues.
So it's
Like okay,
improvements. It's like this is the next iteration, and now we're gonna,
yeah, no
social
system.
democracy would be the next iteration.
I would argue that, yeah. So like
Okay.
this is the thing is it's history really doesn't come in a vacuum. It is pretty gradually. It's not sudden,
But
and
there are
really it's
people who
just
want communism now, and my
yeah.
concern with that is like
I
the
think that
poorest people in our
fails.
society are not going to benefit from that
Yeah,
kind of chaos. Like that will fuck over the people who are worst off now would be even worse off in that kind of if it was just sudden. That's why
yeah.
I do think as an ideology to strive towards, I'm on board. I think it's the right. We would all be better off to live in that world, right? But as of what's going to happen tomorrow, I think
Of course.
we
Well,
need to
this is
make
the
our
thing.
way there.
What you're describing as is like immediately communism now. Like I don't think anyone really serious advocates for that. Like
Okay.
there's some anarchists and like Maoists, a lot
Mm,
of them who aren't really serious, but like the ones who are serious might want to jump to it like right away. And that just doesn't work.
okay.
And like that just simply it just doesn't work because you can go to all sort of okay, the thing is the history of like socialism in general is super not black and white. Like there's great successes, like in many ways, like the Soviet Union. One is to call it socialist, right? If one is to call it that, I mean, they're the first country to really go to space. They're the reason why the U.S. invented DARPA to spend so much on technological innovation to compete with them. They're the reason why they, invented supermarkets to have a greater standard of living. To say, look how much better we are than the USSR. There's all
Hmm.
sort of things that the U.S. did because of the Soviet Union. Like, I think capitalism. There was a reason why capitalism was the best when Soviet Union was around because capitalist countries were actually put pressure to actually be better. Like whereas before in the 1920s, if you looked at the Soviet Union in the 50s versus, but after it had industrialized, it provided a frankly way better life than capitalism in the 20s. But capitalism, social democracy was better. It undoubtedly won.
Right.
That's just a simple fact. And the thing is there's another thing about the Soviet Union is it kind of skipped ahead on the laws of history. When Karl Marx was talking about socialism, he was pretty explicit in the countries, and Engels, and Lenin, interestingly, were very explicit in the countries they thought socialism was possible. And that was the
Mm,
countries that had been
okay.
industrialized. And that was very explicitly Germany, England, France, and they thought even France was too backward. They put France reluctantly. It was really Germany and England. And then after the Civil War in the United States, they thought the United States would also be there. The United States was very.
Okay.
They thought they saw because they'd finally abolished slavery. They were a very industrialized, advanced capitalist economy, a lot of very wealthy that they could do it because the idea is you need capitalism first. It's a historical process, and
Okay. Gotcha.
you can kind
Yeah.
of try to do that, like develop without capitalism, but it's hard because you end up kind of replicating capitalism.
Yeah.
Like the
Yeah.
Soviet Union
That's
did.
exactly what I was worried about, and I feel like
Well,
the
but we've
sentiment
had it now
is.
for so long. That's the difference. Is we've had it now for so
Mm,
long. Whereas like the Soviet Union and Mao's China, like
yeah.
were feudal countries. Like they are monarchies that are completely agrarian.
Hmm.
When they came to power,
Yeah.
they're just super underdeveloped. So like they had to like first of all, I mean, this is the thing worth saying is that Lenin didn't even want to implement socialism right away. Lenin basically implemented state capitalism when he was the leader of the Soviet Union, which was called a new economic plan. For 15 years, some thought it should be more than that. And the idea was to basically have like this state capitalism, sort of like what you get with like social democracy, or in a more draconian form, kind of what China has now. In terms of like
Okay.
this quote unquote capitalism, but where the government directs things so that like the wealth is actually going to productive things and people are being lifted out of poverty, right? Because capitalism doesn't necessarily always lift people out of poverty. Like capitalism in the majority of countries actually has increased poverty, like especially in Latin America, Africa, much of Europe before social democracy. Really was when until social democracy and state capitalism, when capitalism started really lifting thousands, millions out of poverty.
Hmm.
Um, so like that was Lenin's idea first for a while. The thing is this idea of like trying to actually become socialist right away didn't become a thing kind of until by accident with Stalin. And Stalin, started what everyone knows as forced collectivization. And I'm sure anyone who knows the history knows that that was a shit show, to say the least.
Yeah. Yeah.
It worked. That's the thing. It worked in the sense that Russia industrialized in 30 years and took Britain 70. I mean, it worked, but it was horrors. Like
Right.
tons of, like, it was held at people, like the peasantry was held at gunpoint, and tons of people were being sent to the gulag who weren't productive enough, and
Yeah.
uh, you know in some cases because of extraction of grain to ship to trade for weaponry to build their military, caused famines in places like the Ukraine and Kazakhstan. Really a lot of terrible shit. But the reason why they did that forced collectivization wasn't because they're like, oh socialism is the time now, let's do it now. It's because
Mm.
they saw this fucking Nazi German military machine, literally openly wanting to basically destroy Slavic people. Like that was the whole project, is to turn East Europe into Lebensraum, which is a settler colonial project, basically to they wanted to enslave the Slavs. No joke.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
they saw Russia really thought, like, the Bolshevik Party thought that Nazi Germany and Britain were going to team together, because at the time Britain was pretty white supremacist. Like they were still had India as a colony, and they
Right.
and Churchill notoriously like hated Indians. He was very big racist. So they thought Britain and Germany were going to team up against them, with Japan also on the other side. Like there was
Hmm.
this paranoia. So they wanted to develop as fast as possible. So they created this like super statist system where they basically, like, things were collectivized, right? So like Stalin called it socialism in one country. But it was really like this really like aggressive form of uh, exploitation, frankly, um, where basically like you could look at USSR as like one big corporation, but it
Mm.
worked like to develop. But the thing is with like massive human costs, like
Right.
undoubtedly, even if they are inflated by like the propagandists, like the numbers are super inflated, but like there are huge human costs. And at the end of the day, even when like things slowed down, the authoritarianism slowed down under Khrushchev, then they tried to like plan the economy. They were planning their economy on fucking math, with mathematicians on chalkboards. They didn't have computers like Amazon and Walmart do. Which Amazon and Walmart, by the way, plan their whole production. Like they use central planning. It's no joke. They don't
Mm.
use a market system to guide their production. But back then, the production they didn't have that technology. They didn't have
Yeah.
computers, so
Yeah.
they were all there. They would have like cheap food, like very affordable food. So even though people weren't starving in the late 50s, when things cooled down in the USSR, they're arguably a first world country, but like barely, kind of like a developing first world country. You had this mismatch all the time where people would get access to things, but because they could never predict the consumer demand, they would always be behind it, and there would be like these shortages all the time. So there's all sort of
Mm.
like little failures here and then, but I think you could, if you were to crudely summarize, I mean, they really tried to do something that, number one, was faced with huge like external ramifications. Like we try to do a revolution in a world system, especially as an underdeveloped country that hasn't even had capitalism yet. It's just not going to work. Like, I mean, and
Mm.
this is why it's not just like Marx and Engels, but even Lenin's hope wasn't even that like socialism in Russia. His hope was that you could use the Russian Revolution to catapult revolution in Germany, Finland, and all sort of other countries. And it actually did in Germany, and it failed. And it did in other countries like Finland. Finland got a social democracy. Germany got Hitler. But
You got to roll the dice. Yeah, that I think that addresses a lot of my concerns because I definitely, um, I just feel like sometimes I'm put off and just concerned about this idea of like, um, abolish capitalism right this minute, institute socialism. That feels like the sentiment to me, and I don't know how much that would help people who are in need of help right now. And I think that's what I'm mostly concerned about: wealth inequality, and uh, reducing suffering across the U.S. and making it a more equal place with more opportunity for people and less discrimination. But I think that makes sense as an overall goal that we are working towards.
yeah, that's what I see is communism, which is,
Yeah,
let's be clear, like communism as we know it. I mean, anarchists would disagree. The anarchists would say they've established it before, but communism is like a stateless, classless society that's never existed yet, really. It's something
right.
you aim to, right? Socialism is the transition between that. Now, the USSR didn't really have either of those. They were in a phase before socialism and capital communism called what's called they called the dictatorship of the proletariat, which is not one single dictator, but it's basically a kind of system meant that it is a dictatorship, but like supposed to be collectively driven, like a
Mhm.
democratic dictatorship, but it really wasn't. It was like a bureaucracy, even if there was no single dictator, but it was like a very autocratic system aimed initially at like crushing the bourgeoisie, but and defending itself against like invaders, which happened. Like it's no joke. Like over 11 countries invaded the USSR during the Russian Revolution. Really, the civil war was chaos.
Damn. Yeah.
It was really so. It
Wow.
was total. Yeah, I mean, they barely even survived the civil war. It was pretty insane. But
Right. Yeah, that's fucked.
yeah. So I would say
That makes
I
sense
forgot.
though.
I forgot where I was going with this, but the point more so is these things don't happen in a vacuum. It's really a gradualist thing. It takes a while to
Mhm.
get to these things, and we can take a lot. We can learn a lot also when it comes to development of systems, just with the way capitalism developed. Because even though capitalism as we know it really started with England, and
Mhm.
really with England in the late 1700s and early 1800s, capitalism had been tried before. That's something that's overlooked. It's actually been
Mhm.
done. So capitalism was tried as a system, but just very short lived. So historians generally don't really care about it or talk about much about it. But capitalism, like that system, has been done in a sort of proto way. Um, as early as the 1400s with Genoa and Venice, like which were Italian, the Italian city states before Italy
Mhm.
was a country, which were basically Genoa and Florence and Venice were basically city states pretty much governed by merchants. The merchants seized power and kind of like indirect, like they basically governed society. And this is capitalism as we know it before, though, like the concept of liberalism. So it's like very early primitive, like capitalism. Then the second time capitalism was sort of done was with the Dutch Republic. This is more like the 1600s. Uh, very short-lived too. The I forgot to say the city states in Italy, because they were fucking city states. They were small. They ended up just getting conquered.
Mhm.
Russia was always in a period of sorry, not Russia. What I'm saying, Europe was in a period of constant war, really since the breakup of the Roman Empire. Like it was really changing hands between countries invading each other, really until like the 1900s, like complete chaos in Europe. But yeah, also you had the Dutch Republic with capitalism, very short lived. But you had like this merchant system, and this is partially how a lot of liberals, early liberal capitalists, were able to kind of develop their ideology, like Adam Smith,
Yeah.
thinkers of capitalism. They were able to develop their ideology kind of on these past examples and the development of like this gradual capitalism. And then as a system, as we know, it didn't get implemented too much later. And capitalism didn't really become a full totalizing system until it became a global system. That's something you find with most systems is until it becomes really like
Mhm.
a widespread, that's when it really kind of wins and becomes like the
Yeah.
hegemony,
So
right?
you're
Which
saying
is
that socialism or communism has not been allowed to progress to that point.
no. I mean, there hasn't even been a socialist revolution. I mean, there's been all sort of revolutions, but there hasn't been an explicitly socialist revolution until the Russian Revolution. And that's pretty recent history.
Yeah.
So like, and that's the thing is that you have these uh, sort of weird examples that defy kind of the laws of development. I mean, according to Marx, at least, and according to many socialists, this is according to common sense economics, really. Because if you have a system like socialism, you need a surplus to already be there. You need a sort of abundance. If the society is extremely poor to begin with, and and you have like a very large level of you're just frankly like very underdeveloped and you don't even have capitalism, what is there to distribute? It's really like a distribution of poverty, you know. Even though you can develop living standards, like let's be honest, like if you look at USSR and um, the early 1900s versus the 1960s. I mean, it's incredible the development they achieved. They achieved a lot of scientific achievements, infrastructure achievements. Really, Moscow looks as beautiful as it is because of the Soviet Union. But like it didn't. It ultimately ended up collapsing. It ended up failing. So that's the lesson to take from it, if that makes sense. Uh, I think you left. You disconnected. Oh, yo, did you disconnect by accident?
Yeah, my internet sometimes just cuts out, and it's really unfortunate. My bad. Um,
No worries. What was the last thing you heard say? Because I was at the end of that point, and
um,
it was very
shit.
almost done.
Um, well, we just talked about how it never got the chance to fully develop, and then you were saying that capitalism had all this kind of time to progress, and the
Yeah.
Russian Revolution was just like one of the only events where like communism got its opportunity. But I do want to ask you this.
I should also say though,
Oh,
I'll
sorry. Go
say is,
ahead.
yeah, just to finalize that point, is what I mean is the you look at the achievements, not like black and white, even though these systems ended up collapsing, due
Yeah.
to a wide variety of contradictions. There are
Yeah.
some huge achievements. Even back in the day, Bernie Sanders used to say this. Back when it was there's some old speeches of his before he actually ran for president, where he used to be more like a little bit more radical in what he said, but he would
Yeah.
say, "I may not agree with the authoritarian system, but the USSR gave people free health care, good quality daycare, Medicare,
Yeah.
pharmacare, housing."
Yeah.
And the thing is like he's kind of right. Like they did have these great achievements, and that's part really why social democracy was able to exist is because of the
Hmm.
Soviet Unions. So many people were like,
Hmm.
"Oh wow, these things are great." People forget, like even though it may like compared to the already developed first world, who had much more time, plus imperialism and slavery, colonialism,
Hmm.
all these things to gain its wealth, all this time and all this opportunity. We may look at the Soviet Union like it was like failed, right? But if this third world looked at the Soviet Union like it was wow, like it was like Jesus, like if this is a third world country, and that's why India for so long had sympathies for the Soviet Union, and many third world countries, especially also in the Middle East, really felt
Hmm.
inspired by it because for a developing country to go from agrarian backward society, the sick man of Europe, that's what they called Russia, the sick man of Europe, really underdeveloped, to having like one of the first world's underground subway systems, to having like full employment, zero homelessness, all sort of huge
Hmm.
achievements. I mean, it's stuff to be learned
Hmm.
from for sure. I mean, even a lot of, and I know people who study urban planning, who very apolitical program, who say that like the commie blocks, so to speak, they call them the commie blocks that were developed, like the big housing complexes, were very successful. I mean, like considering
Yeah.
they're destroyed by a fucking war, right? They're destroyed by World War
Hmm.
II, and they're pretty poor. They developed that. I mean, like, come on, like we're like
Right.
USA is the richest country in the world. We can be developing, do something. We
Hmm.
can do what they did, like 10
Yeah.
times better.
Like just as easily as we look back and identify these places where the Soviet Union went wrong. In a couple hundred years, people could be looking back on United States capitalism and be like, they didn't fucking have health care. People were in extreme poverty, like all
People
these,
had to pay for
right.
electricity and
All
water.
these things that we normalize right now that in the future, like we can look back and say, what's the human cost of that? Millions of lives dying from starvation, etc., prisons, homelessness, all those things you mentioned. So I think, yeah, that's
I
a
mean,
really good point. And I'm definitely not attacking communism in that sense. I'm just trying to
oh,
think
that you have every right
practically.
to criticize
Um,
like the Soviet Union. Like I criticize them so heavily, like I did here, like in terms of the bureaucracy and sort of authoritarianism and
yeah.
general like they're just but like in my opinion, a lot of the economic stuff has to do with bureaucracy and also the limitations of their time.
Right.
Like that's like a big part of that. Because like we always consider it's easy to compare countries that were had slavery and colonialism and imperialism versus a country that was like tried to develop like a worker state in the midst of a fucking brutal war, two brutal wars, Civil War and World
Yeah.
War II as well. It's just it's incomparable, really. So I
It'd
look
be
at
cool
it
to
in
go to
context.
Cuba. I've never even kind of
I've been
thought
to
about
Cuba
it, but
twice.
that seems like it could be an interesting experience to kind of see what that looks like in practice. Because I think that's what I'm really worried about is, um, what are these systems going to look like in practice, and like
Well, and
how we get there.
I think we can tell by what systems can look like in practice by looking at how our countries already look like now.
Right.
Like for example, like a country like Cuba doesn't have natural resources beyond sugar. Cuba
Yeah.
like has to import oil. It has to
Mhm.
import a wide variety of. It's an island. It's quite literally an island. I mean, um, BC in Canada has a far bigger economy, far bigger resources than Cuba,
Right.
and so it's by its nature very very like limited in what it can do. Plus, the worst thing with the embargo and sanctions, it's not literally allowed to trade with anybody other than other countries who are also sanctioned. So with
Yeah.
Cuba, people forget what a sanction means. It's not just like some penalty or something. A sanction is globally enforced. It's not just U.S. businesses that don't do business with Cuba, but it's
Hmm.
globally enforced. So the way the sanction works now is if I'm let's say I'm a Canadian business, European business, and I sell my products to Cuba, I cannot enter the U.S. for over 180 days,
Holy
something like that.
shit. That's
Yeah, so
fucked up.
it's very risky. So or if I import something from
Mm.
Cuba, it's the same thing applies. So it's a way
Yeah.
to cut off all sort of income. Cuba, right? Like any country, they can print their own currency as much as they want, but you can't print foreign currency, and people
Hmm.
aren't going to accept Cuban dollars on the world market.
Yeah.
You need access to euros, U.S. dollar, or British pounds or something. So like you need foreign currency, you need inflows of that.
Hmm.
So if they got no fucking able to get commerce, how are they going to do that? They're really
Right.
limited. Now they try their only thing they had before was traveling. They travel income, like the
Tourists.
tourism industry. Yeah, it's because people bring in foreign dollars. That gives foreign currency.
Mm.
Now the thing with this has been devastated by COVID and the embargo. But I actually visited Cuba twice before the embargo happened and before COVID, and also visited Mexico. And that was a really interesting experience for me because Cuba like it's not a utopia. But one thing I noticed is there was nobody homeless, and there were in Mexico. In Cuba, you can go outside the resort and not like be totally safe. No one's gonna
Yeah.
rob you. Uh, you can go to like casual like cafes, bars, and not think you're gonna get fucking run into cartels.
Yeah.
And it felt like a regular country. Whereas like when I you go to Mexico, you go to some places, it's like amazing, luxurious, fucking amazing. You go
Yeah.
to
And you're in the
there's some places.
slums.
And then you're in the slums suddenly. Like it's an interesting experience. And this is the thing:
Mm.
Mexico is way wealthier than Cuba. Like Mexico has tons of
Right.
wealth. It has all sorts of oil wealth, all sort of agricultural potential. It
But it
has
has like
really,
insane inequality, right? Like, I
yeah,
mean,
and
people
insane
have,
poverty.
yeah, poverty. So in Cuba, like, is there not like visible poverty? Like, for example, if you go into a certain neighborhood where it's like just, messed up, like, does
Well,
that exist there, or not to the degree where it would in like the
there's,
United
I would
States?
say, now it's much worse. I would say now for sure there's a
Oh,
lot
okay,
of
I got
poverty. Like now with the tourism industry and the
you.
Trump bringing back the embargo, like this
Yeah,
thing about Obama, right? Like Obama was a lot better than Trump. Like Obama, he kept the sanctions with the businesses, but he removed the embargo so you could like at least more people could travel to Cuba. He also eased up restrictions on medical supplies so that they can fucking import insulin and stuff like that.
yeah,
Now in Cuba, they have shortages of insulin. They have shortages of all sort of medicine. It's a
damn,
disaster. It's like I would call it like it's a form of honestly like arguably a kind of genocide what they're doing in Cuba with the sanctions. It's really horrific. But they've
yeah,
actually
that's fucked up.
But the thing is about Cuba, one thing is even now, and this is the case now, and even more so before, but nobody starves, and nobody is like dies from starvation.
Mhm.
Nobody goes like unfed, untaken care of. But the thing is with Cuba, right, in a country like that that's under so much pressure, one thing I did notice is that people don't have access to like a lot of the things on the world market. Like you have like, because they're prohibited from doing business with so many, most businesses are
Right.
prohibited from doing business with them.
But that's an
You
external
don't
thing, right? It's not
It is,
like
but like it
yeah.
affects their quality of life is what I'm saying. Is like you don't
Mhm.
have access
Mhm.
to, you have TVs that are behind, like really old. You have
Oh, I see what you're
old
saying. Yeah.
phones. You have stuff like that. But one thing about Cuba I liked is that it's actually, I would say Cuba is not an authoritarian country like people say it is. Like compared to like China or something. Cuba, you can they don't censor the internet. You can go on the internet. It's not censored at all, whereas China is totally censored the internet. Uh, and
Yeah.
and yeah, like in Cuba, like you see people in the government who are like garbage truck drivers, who are doctors, who are teachers.
Mm.
You really have to. I don't want to go into too much depth, but I look at the video called Cuban Democracy. There's a few videos on it,
Yeah.
but
I'll
it's
check it out.
definitely not a perfect system. But I wouldn't say
Mhm.
it's any less democratic than our systems. In some
I
ways,
think it
it's
goes
more.
back to that idea of like
It's much. I would
it.
say it's much better than China or North Korea, like for sure. It's. I would say it's most democratic of like the quote unquote Marxist Leninist countries.
Oh, okay, I got you. Yeah, I think it like also goes back to this thing. This like if socialism and communism are so worthless, why do all the great world powers spend so much time, money, and other resources to stifle it? Like why is it
Exactly.
a driving? It's like the U.S.'s identity almost is like based around fighting communism and other you know agendas it disagrees with, but it's very telling. um,
Hmm.
I want to, obviously we've been going for like 2 hours. I want to ask you one final thing, and maybe we can talk
Sure.
about hip hop another time, because this
Up to
was a
you.
cool
Yeah.
conversation. But
Yeah. It's these topics are very like complicated. So
yeah, definitely.
they warrant a lot of discussion. So yeah, like
Um,
it's hard to
so
like be short with them.
yeah, for sure, man. And I feel like I learned a good amount. It was a good talk. I'm curious about this because I've gone back and forth on this idea a lot, but um, we talked about the merits of capitalism and how it has turned towards making people's lives better over the course of the last 100 years. Obviously, there's like fluctuations and sometimes more regressive, more progressive, but like, do you think it's possible to use the undeniable power of capitalism to explicitly make people's lives better? Like, can we, like, I think I can think of a couple examples in the recent times, and for example, like these days, like let's say even like cancel culture, like corporations embracing diversity and uh, making an effort, even if it's superficial. Like obviously, they're full of shit, but like, look, everything under capitalism is going to happen with the purpose of making more money, right? But what if we incentivize the right thing? If we incentivize, you know, not being racist, and we incentivize spread sharing the wealth, and we use the power of capitalism, at least in the time being, to achieve kind of progressive outcomes, which I don't think is impossible. Like we've talked about a bunch of different examples, like the New Deal and many other instances. Like do you see that being a path forward?
I want to also touch on the cancel culture thing because I don't think that like I'm a very big critic of identity politics because I think the idea of having more representation, it doesn't affect the whole population. Like if you let's
Mm.
say you have more black actors or black politicians, it doesn't help all black people. Like it's just a small amount. Like interestingly, because we were talking about the USSR, the USSR did its own form of identity politics back in the day.
Hmm.
And it's ironic because it would probably be considered progressive in today's standards, but it has limitations, just like identity politics has now. And I don't think it solves the problem. Like, for example, USSR, in their system of government, they had a system where there had to be a certain amount of Kazakhs, a certain amount of Ukrainians, a certain amount of different groups. Like there was this representation,
Wow.
and it's like,
So diversity is communism. Holy shit.
well,
They were right all along, dude. Wow. But don't let the conservatives hear this, dude.
Oh yeah, but that's the thing, is does that did like having Ukrainians in Moscow help Ukrainians get sovereignty?
Mhm.
Did Kazakhs in there help? Did Stalin being a Georgian help Georgia? Like, do you know, like it does in the same way, like, did Obama help black people really much?
Right.
It's like, this is the thing. And also about, now to answer the more crucial part of your question, which is like, can capitalism be used to help people? And I think yes, but more in the exception of capitalism, not because of capitalism. So like capitalism and progress can. So there's many ways to look at this. So the thing is oh my God, conservatives will hate this, but capitalism destroys tradition.
How so?
Like capitalism destroy capitalism, I think, is a single biggest force, other than after, obviously after the suffrage women's movement, that has kind of destroyed patriarchy. And not
That's a
very
take.
indirectly.
I'm
No, so
interested.
I'll explain why, and it's kind of in a very brutal, contradictory way.
Okay.
Because capitalism creates a system that demands like the utmost productivity. We produce a lot of stuff. Now
I
that's
see
one
what
of
you're saying.
that's
Yeah.
one of the things that actually you could say another benefit of capitalism. We got a lot of stuff. We
Yeah,
work more
that
than
we don't
ever to
need.
buy shit we don't need. Yeah, like it's a
Yeah.
Fight Club thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing about that, like some of the stuff, let's be honest, is pretty good, but we get
Yeah.
like cheap prices too. There is like all sort of benefits to this. Now the thing is, because people work so much, this also has made it so gradually over time, governments had to realize that shit, we need more workers. Let's get women in the workforce.
Right.
So
Yeah.
then you start having this patriarchal relationship where women have to depend on, because before it's not like women were stupid and brainless and didn't work. They weren't allowed to work. Like they had to be like the fucking just cooking and cleaning. That was like their submission they had to do. Like they had to live under a bread. The male was supposed to get all the bread and all that, and essentially because Friedrich Engels wrote about this, called The Origins of what are they called? Something about private property in patriarchy. I forget what it's called, but basically, because the man, in this time owned like all the property, the women would either be forced to do whatever the man says or like go homeless. It was pretty much like they're pretty there's no freedom. So the thing is when by getting women less dependent on men, which is kind of like part of this, like the bigger part is women's movements, but part of this is also kind of capitalism, because
But then couldn't you say racial progress was also about
Oh no, I would say capitalism
taking
made
black dollars,
absolutely
gay,
not.
like gay rights is like, all right,
Okay,
let's take
so
gay people's money. They have money too. Like let's get them in this. Let's get everyone in this bitch.
Maybe with LGBT, but I would say with race, capitalism undoubtedly made racism worse. So this is a thing that's not actually not actually known in history. I talk about a bit in my Socialism of Warren Buffett video, which the later part goes into the origins of capitalism and slavery. And I also have a podcast about it called The Dark History of Liberalism. Capitalism actually is the system that oversaw the worst form of slavery known to man. So we often look at this is really contradictory, right? Because capitalism is not supposed to be slavery; it's supposed to be different. And as it developed, it was. But slavery didn't always exist. Number one, there's this myth that, like the conservatives will say, they'll say, "Oh, why should Americans be guilty of slavery? Everybody had slavery." This is not true. Feudalism, slavery was largely abolished. Not to say feudalism was better, but capitalism sort of returned as slavery returned as a consequence of mercantilism, which was, like you can look at mercantilism as sort of feudalism when capitalism was emerging in the fringes, which is where
Wait,
merchants were the
so real quick,
proto-capitalists.
just to back up, because I have been wondering about this. Um, when the slave ships arrived, like the first slave ships arrived in Africa and, you know, captured humans to be brought to
Well,
America.
the first slave
Right.
ships for what
Were those
era?
people
Because their
not already
slavery originated much.
enslaved?
Slavery started much was done already in the ancient Egypt. I mean, but like in a very different context. And slavery existed in the Roman Empire, but in a way where it
Mhm.
was basically slavery existed in the way that if you captured a tribe or captured a country, you could enslave their population for a period of time, or depending on, they changed their laws really quite often. But um, slavery emerged in a very different way in the 1700s, and even more actually in the early 1800s, where
So you're saying this was more fucked up?
yes, because slavery
Okay.
became a commodity. It became the thing where you could speculate on slaves like stocks. It's really messed
Mhm.
up. You could buy and sell slaves on an open market. It's a really good book about this called Capitalism and Slavery by Eric Williams. And you can
That
also
sounds
there's also
interesting.
yeah, and there's a bunch of other books about this too. But slavery basically became a very profitable thing, and it became a way to like compete with the countries that didn't have as many slaves, so you could produce goods at very cheap costs. So this is, and also this thing with liberalism played a big role in increasing slavery, because people forget, like, liberalism, the project, even though it gave us things like free speech and civil liberties, the original project of liberalism was to create liberty for the merchant class, for the capitalist class, was basically to prevent tyranny from the feudal lords and for the
Mhm.
aristocracy and king. They didn't want them to take the property and slaves. That's why you find in history the biggest liberals, the early liberals anyway, like Thomas Jefferson, were coincidentally the biggest slave owners.
Mhm.
And it's not I say coincidentally, it wasn't a coincidence, because they're largest advocates of slavery, and that's because when they meant by liberty, they meant less government regulating my slaves. So not only can I
Mhm.
not have slaves, you could before, but I can have as many slaves as I want. That's pursuit of happiness right there.
Right.
That was their idea of pursuit of happiness. And I can also do whatever I want with the slaves. If they disobey, I can torture them, I can kill them, whatever. Whereas there actually was regulations prior to that, like the king really had an ability to not only control what people could do with slaves, how many they could have, but also they would tax a lot of the profits. There's all sort of reason. There's a reason why the bourgeois overthrew the king, right? They did
Mhm.
some progressive things, but there was also this horrific expansion of slavery. That's why you had the worst forms of slavery were really practiced in capitalist Britain, in the Netherlands, Dutch republics, and then America, but
Yeah.
capitalism being abolished, slavery being abolished is a more complex thing. Um, but that's the thing I would say, made made racism much worse. Because also, back before, under feudalism, slavery was justified by religion. They said, like,
Mm.
we're trying to convert people to Christianity. Non-Christians would be enslaved. Whereas
Mhm.
after the fall kind of theocracies, slavery was they needed a new justification for slavery. It started in Britain. Their justification
Right.
for slavery started to become race.
Well, race wasn't even a concept at that point, right? I mean, I think
Race as we know it wasn't, but
you
it
mentioned the
existed.
book, like what was it, Howard Zinn's book, and he
Yeah,
basically explains how like white people were, working side by side with the slaves, and then they started grouping together. So the slave owners were like, "Oh shit, we should probably give the white people a tiny bit of privilege so they can feel superior." Pretty crazy stuff, man.
yeah, for sure. Like, but to say if capitalism being progressive, so I would say, and also because it created this brutalization of the working class, because people, we got more stuff, we got more wealth produced, more. The thing is, the system of capitalism is a system of constant reinvestment. This didn't exist before, like commerce existed throughout history, but the system of wage labor and reinvestment. I basically I am a company. I start a company. I hire wage laborers who produce more than I pay them for. And that's where the profits come from. And I get more. I increase my business by increasing my profits and get investors, other capitalists, to give money to my business. When I give money to my business, they get a share of my profits via dividends and the share of the company. This makes it so it's forced. Capitalism has to keep growing. That's why it's so transformative and why it grows, but also has these huge crises, these huge gigantic downfalls, like the 1929 Great Depression. So it's a very dynamic system, undoubtedly. So it's progressive in that regard, but in this process, it totally destroys a working class, because working class have to work more and more. They're very exploited.
Yeah.
So really radicalized. So there's capitalism. Look at communism, socialism as capitalism's shadow. It kind of is what is there in response to capitalism. Capitalism creates these brutalities, this exploitation. Socialism and social movements more broadly are there to kind of pressure capitalism and overthrow it. That is Marx's idea of like the proletariat, right? It's created and eventually gets stronger and gets more organized. And as society is more advanced, etc., you get the gist. It doesn't have
So
to
are
turn out
you
like
kind
that.
of saying that these progresses through capitalism are essentially just further opportunities for exploitation? Like there's not going to be opportunities, like one way or another it's going to lead to more exploitation, rather than, because like you said,
Not
like the
necessarily,
women's
because
movement, right? Like capitalism enabled that, but is that really like more freedom, or is that just funneling women into
it was definitely more freedom. So this is a thing, the way Marx uses a system called dialectics. He borrows it from Hegel. And it's the idea to look at history through contradictions. Something can be both true and false at once. It can be both good and bad at once. It can be both progressive and regressive at once. This idea of contradiction.
right.
He applies this to his theory of historical materialism, which is not his own theory really, but he applies what is science as materialism, to politics and economics. And it's the idea that history is determined by material economic conditions and changes in nature, changes in production. Dialectics looks at this through this lens. So as we see capitalism, radical changes are happening, bad things are happening, and good things are happening. It's kind of a change, right? There's these contradictions. That's why capitalism will do things like UBI, or not UBI, but it'll give like, might do in the future, but it'll give like these cash transfers. It'll do these policies that also hurt capitalism, but also help it in the long run. You see, it's a very contradictory system. So we'll get benefits and drawbacks. You can look at social democracy as something that kind of arises when capitalism is at a point of collapse and threat, where it needs that.
It needs to preserve itself, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So I don't think it's very particularly useful to advocate for socialism, social democracy as an end in itself, because it's like Obama starting off Obamacare instead of universal health care. Like he started off with this two-tiered system and then ended up getting like a better privatized system. Nothing really changed except that, people who had pre-existing illnesses weren't rejected. That was really the main thing with Obamacare. But he started off with a compromise, whether that was intentional or not, that's up for debate. But you never go to the negotiating table starting with a compromise. It just defeats the whole logic of power. I mean, it goes by the logic of power that you bluff your power, you inflate your power, so that so that the other side, who usually has more power, the capitalists, has a reason to compromise. Now, it's better to overthrow the capitalists democratically or revolution, whichever way happens. I think it's possible democratically, but it will require some force, by law or not. By law is the best, obviously. But there's many ways things can happen. Sometimes if the revolution is the only way, it's the only way. But I think it's more of a last resort kind of thing. Like, because the revolutions is a really risky thing. So
So
generally,
I think you're saying, like, to respond to my concern about like what might happen if we shifted, like you're saying we would only get to that point if things were so bad that it
or there
was
was a
an
radical
inev-
left.
Oh
Like in
yeah, well
Portugal,
that
in
would be
Port
ideal, right?
to give you an idea, like Portugal is not even as radical as it was in the 80s and 70s, but Portugal now has two communist parties, just to give you an idea. Like it has
That's
a
insane.
communist party and a left bloc who is even more left than the communist party. And then there's
Wow,
the socialist party, and then there's a social democratic party, and then there's a far right party and a liberal party. Crazy, right? But that
damn,
gives you an
it's
idea that
crazy
like
from my perspective. You know, like
in
in America,
America.
we have two pretty much right wing parties,
Yeah,
and that's it.
exactly.
That's all
And
you
that gives
get.
and that gives you the idea though that like in Portugal, because you have this like far left,
Yeah.
the quote unquote socialist party, which is like a social democrat party, is able to seem very moderate in the eyes of Portuguese.
Hmm.
So that's what I mean is like if we even want to talk about like social change, we need to get to the point where there's actually a left. Whereas right now there
Hmm.
isn't really a left. Like there's a emerging center left with the rise of
Yeah.
Ocasio Cortez and Bernie, and because I think Bernie losing twice radicalized a lot of people. Like you see a lot of leftists who are former Bernie supporters have become like started reading Marxism, getting into
Hmm.
anarchism, or just getting into history in general, right? Um, Reading Noam Chomsky, reading Michael Parenti, all these figures of the left. I mean, I was radicalized by the 2016 loss. That's for sure. Like, but pushed me like into learning more like radical theory and history. Because before I was just like more of a person who was like, oh, I'm my politics are social democratic because that's what Bernie Sanders is. So I'm whatever that is. And I got more radicalized after
Right.
losing. And I think that's happened to a lot of people. So it just needs to
Yeah.
be in that
I
direction.
think
I
I'm
don't
on the
expect
way
change.
there. Like I'm somewhere in between, but um, I
Mhm.
still think that there are some. Um, I don't know. I think there's something to learn from everything. People just want to discount communism and not get anything positive out of it. And I think the same could be said for capitalism. And I don't know. I think
And
it's
this is
about the
some
nuance, right? Like
one other
you
thing to
gotta,
say that
yeah.
adds to this is capitalism, like elements of capitalism will still exist in the transition to socialism. Like, for
Hmm.
example, one thing that I think will definitely exist under socialism until we get to a point where we can, like have a cyber, this is another whole thing. Cybernetics is, in my opinion, the only way like planning can really work, which we have the technology to do, but I think it'll be gradual. We'll start planning like some aspects of our economy, things that aren't the
Hmm.
market doesn't do very well. We'll start planning. We need more planning for climate
That
change.
makes
That's
sense.
inevitable. But like I think we
Yeah.
will still have the market. Like I think the market will still exist for a long while. Like this is the thing. We shouldn't abolish
Hmm.
all commerce, all market exchange. Like, is it really like should we expropriate small business people right away? Or should we start with like the big capitalists? Like, because
Yeah.
it's like, are they really doing harm? Even if they're small businesses do exploit people, like that, this is true. But are they like a threat to like global socialism? Like, really? Um, I don't think so.
Mm.
Like, that's why I think we need like a sort of gradualist approach. Like, for example, if a work, like I think the big industries, like should be collectivized, but small businesses, I think we should do a sort of policy. This has been promoted by democratic socialists. Is the idea that if a small business goes bankrupt or wants to sell their business, they're legally obligated to first ask the workers to buy the business and own it together as like a
Hmm.
cooperative. And I think that's a really good idea. Like Richard
Seems like a
Wolff talks
common
like that.
sense idea. But
Yeah, and I
I
think that's a
also feel
gradual way.
like that's possible, right? Nobody's preventing anybody from doing that right now.
Well, now no, now it's preventing it because now they can just sell it to the highest bidders. So like usually they'll just give it to another capitalist, and they're not obligated to sell it to the workers. Whereas the idea is to make it
Oh.
so like they have to, is they have to at least
Hmm.
ask the workers to like if they want to. Whereas now
Oh,
like
so
your
they would
business
get
can just
priority over it.
yeah. So now your business, like if you work for like a restaurant, if
Hmm.
they want to just close their business, the whole staff will be fired and lose their job. Nothing the
Mm,
staff can
okay,
do.
I see
Whereas
what you're saying.
under this law, they would be obligated to ask the workers, like, do you want to take over the business and own it? You know?
Well, but then how much would would workers realistically be able to afford something like that? Like, or would it be
Well, we
just
think about we would use the policies we already use to help capitalists, but to help workers. So like
okay,
so like private banks already
like take a
basically are the
loan or
reason.
something?
Yeah, they take all sort of loans that never paid back. Like that's why we have very low interest
Mm,
rates to kind of prop up businesses.
yeah.
And by the way, when the banks give out money, they're creating new money. That's another story. But when banks are creating money, they're creating new money. It's not actually lending. They're creating new money
I
via
mean,
debt.
dude, your explanations of like how money is actually dealt with by our government is pretty fucking insane. Like, I don't understand. Like, how is this not more widespread knowledge? Like, why is like people who study economics like they don't know about this, or why is it that
Well,
this is not?
a lot of people, just not all of them, like Keynesians and post Keynesians and MMT people and Marxists, some Marxists will know, but
Mm,
like a lot of people just won't. Um, some people will know something. It's not. It's all. It's a contradictory thing. It's not like black and white. But yeah, like why is it not widespread? I mean, this is some food for thought, right? Is for a long time we believed in divine right of kings. Like the majority of people, even intellectuals.
right.
If you look at Descartes, right, in the 1960s, he was like this revolutionary philosopher, right? He was still talking about God and hell and heaven,
Yeah.
like ideas that were like backward already in the 1800s.
Mhm.
So, like to give you an idea, like cultural hegemony, this is the term, is the mainstream ideology of the ruling class is very hard to unlearn. And a lot of
Mm,
things that are very obvious and right in front of us aren't widespread knowledge until they are. It always starts
right.
on the fringes. Like if you look at flat earthers dominated the world at one point. We believed the
Mm,
earth was flat for a very long time. And it's not like it was one discovery that led people to change their mind. It's been discovered for a long time. It's just, it didn't become until
mhm.
Copernicus discovered it. And then after that, not even people still didn't believe it for a very
Right.
long time. It took a while to actually become mainstream. I mean, even capitalism, like capitalism's ideology was pretty radical. Like the idea of like liberalism, especially like liberalism was radical for its time. We always have to look at it in context, right? Why isn't some of this crazy stuff mainstream knowledge? I mean, think throughout history, the backward shit people believed. Like, humans used to sacrifice themselves to the sun way back in ancient civilizations.
Yeah.
That's you get the
All
gist.
right. Well, I guess we got to just keep the culture war going then. Fucking,
Yeah, more canceling, more comedians, more
yeah. Get Joe Rogan off
rainbow
Spotify.
and more rainbow M&Ms.
Oh yeah, dude. That's the talk of the town. Tucker Carlson's about to fucking bust a nut. Ah, well, great, man. This has been a super engaging. Your knowledge of history is honestly insane. Like that's really impressive, man.
I promise you'll learn a lot
Yeah,
just by that book you're reading, the People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn.
yeah.
Like, it's a very long book. I actually, when I read it, I listened to the audio version.
Oh,
And
that's nice.
these type of books like really can give a lot of knowledge. Like it can take really just like 10 good history books to like exponentially increase one's knowledge.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, I'm gonna keep reading that. I'm like halfway through. I mean, it's unbelievable. But yeah, like you said, it's so long. It's dense.
It's so long.
They got every rebellion in there, like over a course of 300 years. It's a lot,
Yeah.
but it's so good, man. It's the stories you never hear too, which is just again like why, and it's kind of crazy that now they want to like they already didn't teach this shit and now people are the right is trying to ban any mention of an alternative perspective, you know what I mean? Like
And that's what they've
it's
always done.
fucked up.
The this is like, I would say that, like Marx put it very well in I think the Communist Manifesto, but we're gonna paraphrase it because I don't know, I forget the way he said it, but it was basically something like the centrists, he doesn't use that term, but like the moderates, the centrists, they want to keep his society the same, to keep it
Mhm.
static. And that's usually like traditional conservatives. Reactionaries, which are more like the far right conservatives, fascists at the extreme, want to turn back the wheel of history. They want to roll back the wheel of history into like a previous time. It's literally regressing, like going
Right.
backwards. The revolutionaries want to accelerate history. We want to like move history forward. Now, I think how you interpret revolutionary, there's many ways. Like there's the more what are like the ultra leftists, like the anarchists and Maoists who want to move society more forward, like very fast. And there's the more reformers, and then there's more the gradualist Marxists, which I would consider myself more of, like which I think Marx himself was like more of a gradualist. I actually think Lenin was a bit of a gradualist, and I also think there's a bunch of other people like that.
That makes a lot of sense to me. The gradualist approach. I think that's something I could get behind, but that's not really the sentiment of leftists on Twitter, for example, which is like,
well, yeah, it's Twitter. I mean,
I just mean in general.
Think about, you need those people though. I think you need the radical ultra leftists, because I don't think they're going to win, but without them, you won't have a more compromised position.
Yeah,
if that makes sense. Like, because you need them to have a more like moderate be like, you need the to push the center to the left. You need like the radical left, if that makes sense.
Do you watch any like leftist YouTubers? Like, I don't know, like anyone that you would recommend? Because I've been starting to get a lot of recommendations in the past year or so, like Vosh, Hassan, people
Vosh
like that.
Is terrible.
And I'm just kind of like, I'm interested in seeing other perspectives. Like, I'm not like, I feel like I get more out of Vosh's content than Hassan's personally, because Hassan's just like like screaming about shit. I feel like I do learn a couple things, but I'm interested in seeing other shit.
Sure. Yeah, so I would recommend, first off, no streamers. Streamers are always bad.
Is that the problem? Because I feel like,
well, I'll say is because most streamers, number one, attracts a type of person. You ever heard of the Dunning?
Really like that.
You ever heard the Dunning-Kruger effect?
Yes, I have. But
like people who are kind of less intelligent tend to overestimate their abilities, and people who are more intelligent are more keen to like learn stuff. Yeah. The thing is people like who are often likely to start streaming, they're likely to kind of be overconfident and thus spout out very ill-educated
hot takes.
Or just really like uninformed takes without looking into the context. Now, someone like Vosh might seem smart in comparison to like a conservative,
right? Because he's essentially doing the same shit.
Well, I think he is better. Like, he's not a completely stupid person. Like, but the thing is if you compare like Vosh to like Ben Shapiro or like these idiot ideologues, like he's obviously going to appear smarter. Yeah. But the thing is about Vosh is like I've heard from the clip. I don't know. I don't follow like the stream stuff much, but the clips I've seen of him, he just does not seem like a person who knows history very well, because he has a very black and white view. It's like for him, there are like anti-authoritarians and then the tankies, and then he calls himself anti-authoritarian, but he seems to like support American imperialism a lot of the time. He's a really weird guy.
Right.
Like, I don't know, but like that's the thing is, I would say like people who do like history and philosophy based essays, who do reading and present it in an accessible way, are like the best channels. Like there's a bunch of channels I could recommend. Let me think off the top of my head. There's all sort of podcasts that are really good.
Yeah, like what?
Okay.
The One Dime podcast.
I'm trying to think of like who's accessible. There's levels to accessibility. Like there's like they're more academic stuff, and then there's like the more. Oh, if you want like a good YouTuber for like theory, look at Cuck Philosophy. He's not called that anymore. His name is Jonas Cheka, CCK Philosophy. He's excellent. And economics, unlearning economics is really good. I don't think he's a communist, but he's like, I think he's like a sort of democratic socialist who believes a lot of things I do, but he's really good, like economist. Unlearning economics is excellent. I'd recommend him.
Cool.
Second Thought. If you want accessible videos, Second Thought is really good. Ugopnik.
Oh yeah, I've seen that dude. I think from your channel actually. Oh, dude, do you know
podcast
FD Signifier?
I know him.
He mentioned your video, and he's pretty sick
too.
I like his videos. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty
Awesome.
cool. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, I know FG Signifier. That was cool. He mentioned the rap video. We got to talk about hip hop in the next one.
Dude,
Like
I know. Fuck.
we need to do like we need to do like a top 5 or something.
Yeah,
Or
man.
like
I would
review
love to do
albums.
that. I
Yeah.
wanted to ask you like all about the video we were supposed to talk about. I had a
Yeah.
bunch of things, and I was going to talk about politics at the very end, but I'd love to know about like what rappers you're into and like how you first got into rap and why, some of the other things I want to ask about is like how some rappers can kind of pull off that mainstream appeal, but also have substance, whereas like others just can't, like go commercial while still being good.
Yeah, for
You
sure.
know, incentives for artists to make non-standardized music and just a lot of things you mentioned in the video that I wanted to get to, but I think we can have a general like hip hop conversation that would be really cool.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we can do one like exclusively on hip hop. That would be pretty sick. But I just remembered some channels. You said some good channels. Our Changing Climate is really good.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Let me write that down.
I actually think Hakeem is pretty good. There's a
Oh
YouTuber called
yeah, dude. Vosh
I have
brought
some
me to him,
I have some
and I
disagreements
liked
with
it.
him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have some disagreements with him because I tend to be more critical of like the USSR than he is.
Uh-huh.
But and of certain things like Marxism Leninism, but I think like a lot of his videos are pretty spot on. Like
I
just like
think that they're well
I,
researched.
I've
You
read
can tell he knows his shit. I think
he
that's
does
really
because
important.
I've read a lot of the same stuff he has, and like it takes one to know one sometimes. Like the people who are
Yeah.
really good. Oh, and one other. I gotta recommend Marxist Paul.
All right, let me get this down.
Marxist Paul has a whole series on like socialism 101 where he explains like Marxist concepts.
Mm-hmm.
He's really, really good. Like he's very accessible. He's like a quintessential education podcast. I might have him on in the future.
That'd be sweet.
Yeah, he's the Irish guy. Also non-compete. I don't really agree with him either on a lot of stuff because he's kind of like an anarchist. But he has good educational
I've
videos.
definitely heard of him too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. I'm
Um,
not like I'll have people who I disagree with ideologically, but they make good like educational stuff regarding like the basics.
yeah,
That's the
that's
thing. You'll find with
important.
the left, like a lot of the left agree on like the basics, and then they'll be disagree on certain things historically and certain things like solutions.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
like
that makes sense.
those I'd recommend. I'm sure there's others like I don't know. I just don't watch a lot of YouTube to be honest.
Oh,
Um,
really? I've
yeah,
just
but there's
started to recently since I
oh
actually made this channel. But it also like it inspires me to
Z-
like how I should,
it's forget Pro man.
what is it?
Prolacult makes like doc. His name is Prolacult.
Oh, Protocol. Yeah.
Prolcut.
Yeah, yeah.
He he's a YouTuber who yeah what am I saying? Prolacult does documentaries, and his documentaries they're kind of long, but they're broken up in pieces, and I think you'll get like a good understanding of certain phenomena. Now, there's a lot
Yeah.
of history stuff. There's all sort of history stuff. I just like they're all scattered. There's all sort of good podcasts. Who do I who whoever I like often when there's a YouTuber who I really like I'll bring them on One Dime Radio
Hmm.
if I can get them anyway. Sometimes they're too big, but like um yeah, there's a lot of people. If you want like an
Yeah, I'll check it
anarchistic
out.
if you want like an anarchist perspective, like his name is Saint Andrewism.
Cool.
Although he's like an anarchist, so I disagree with him. but
That's
he
good
does
though, man. You
but he
want to
does
hear
like good.
those different views, right? Like that's part of it.
Yeah,
I've just
exactly.
like I really started watching YouTube videos when I made this channel. Mostly, like I used YouTube before, obviously, but not like consistently for content, like and entertainment and knowledge. But I think it helps me like know what kind of content I personally want to make, and also like just educates me more on these topics. That I like. Obviously, I have a general education of like I have read most of this stuff, but um, I think it's
think you
different
would.
when you're talking it out with someone or hearing it from like a peer, not like a textbook or like
Oh, and
just
it's
reading it by yourself.
sometimes we just don't have the time, right? We don't always like sometimes we really don't have the time to read all these books, and I understand it. Like
Yeah.
really, it's just the fact like working from home is the only reason why I have the ability to listen to so many audiobooks and read.
Mhm.
But before the pandemic, it was a bit harder. Uh, I listened to a lot of podcasts before the pandemic because like I would go into work and just listen
Yeah,
to podcasts
commuting.
all
I
the
would
time.
listen to podcasts all the
Yeah,
time too. Dude,
yeah, it's the
the
thing.
last time I went on vacation, like I read I read the Communist Manifesto, and that was really good. But I was just like laughing at myself, like I'm on vacation reading this shit. Like it was really great though. Like I learned, and I had read it before in college too. But there's so much knowledge in there.
And yeah, for podcasts, I have like if you want the really educational stuff, I got some podcasts if you want.
Yeah, I'm here.
I would say I have to say like Revolutionary Left Radio, otherwise known as Rev Left Radio, is really like excellent. Like they have episodes on so many historical things, so many issues, so many theorists, so many works. Like, and
Yeah.
it's he always brings it, you listen to Rev Left Radio for like the guests. He always brings these really interesting guests. Um, for like and also, yeah, he's really excellent. He also has a podcast called Red Menace, which is kind of like they go over text, like they'll break down, certain Marx texts, certain historical texts. It's really interesting. Uh, yeah, there's others too. There's like this. There's if you honestly like you'll get a lot if you. I'm sure you listen to Noam Chomsky lectures, right? Because you read
Yeah.
Requiem for a Dream. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
there's some of these like public intellectuals who are really good speakers who are very knowledgeable, and just you'll learn like so much from their lectures. One of those people is Michael Parenti. Michael Parenti.
I've seen
And
some of his stuff. Let me look him up though.
check the yellow lecture, the lecture when he's yeah, like it's colored
Oh yeah,
yellow.
this dude is fucking dope. Hell
Yeah,
yeah, hell yeah.
Michael Parenti is an I've listened to every Michael Parenti lecture. Like he's a fucking excellent guy. And also Richard Wolff is good now. Like you'll find Richard Wolff is one of like the best teachers. But
I've
like
seen his
Marxists,
stuff too. Wait,
a lot of
isn't he
Marxists hate him.
Gravel
He
Institute or
he
whatever?
was on Gravel Institute, but like a lot of Marxist like theorists who study Marxism kind of academically like
Mhm.
dislike Richard Wolff because they think he waters stuff down too much. And he's kind of like what you call a market socialist, which is not all Marxists are like that. Like let's just say that. Uh, but he's like a great teacher. Like Richard Wolff is excellent for learning this stuff. And Yanis Varoufakis, he's another guy. He's I would call him more so like yeah, he's a Marxist. But Yanis Varoufakis, excellent sort of teacher of sorts who will give really lectures. And now, if you decide to get into like the more historical stuff, like you want to understand the Soviet Union, I'll tell you like who not to watch because
Okay.
there are like the tankies.
Yeah.
Now, I don't like the word like what Vosh, people like him, they call everybody who doesn't support U.S. imperialism a tanky.
Yeah.
I hate that. Like,
Yeah. It's pretty
it's just dumb.
stupid.
Or someone who acknowledges the successes of the USSR will be labeled tanky. But there are some people who unironically, very fringe amount of people who unironically kind of defend like everything about the
Yeah.
USSR, or who will defend like Stalin even.
I've seen
And
that with China too, where people will just
yeah,
like
yeah, there is that.
everything that's said bad about China is like U.S. government propaganda, and everything good is like and it's just like you can tell they're doing
Yeah,
too
like
much.
it's not good to think in those extremes, right? Like there's people who buy
Exactly.
into all the propaganda, and there's the people who think it's all propaganda, and that's like a very
Right.
uncritical way to think. And then yeah, so
Exactly.
there's if you want to look at the history of the USSR, I think there's some bad channels, like there's like Finnish Bolshevik, who gives you the name tells you everything, but like the name checks out, but like I don't know, he has a very
Yeah.
weird conceptions, like a Stalinist conception of history. I don't know, I'm not a
Hmm.
big fan. And a lot of people watch his videos and they come out like thinking, oh yeah, like everything's told about Stalin is a lie. And yeah, sure, there's exaggerations, but like they forget
Right.
about like the brutalities and
Yeah.
just how like fucking damage that did to like the socialist movement in general. But if you want to like, get in the weeds of like the Soviet history, there's some really good podcasts. Like there's Cosmopod, called Cosmopod. They're like these hosts are fucking knowledgeable.
Yeah.
If you think I know history, like the hosts of these show, Jesus, like
Yeah.
they're
I
really
want to consume
knowledgeable.
more content like that because I think you hit it on the head with the reaction streamers. Like it's really kind of worthless at the end of the day. You know, it's somewhat entertaining, but
It can be a
you know,
good gateway. It can be a good
yeah,
gateway into like the left ideas, but I
I
feel
think
like if you
that's a great
that's
strength.
is.
Another big strength is at least one thing I've gotten from Vosh that I haven't gotten from other um, of these kind of reaction streamers that I've seen lately. Um, is that he will articulate uh, ideas that I agree with really well, and that'll help me in turn articulate my own beliefs. I don't know if that makes sense, but just like
Oh
hearing
yeah,
his,
yeah. He's a good debater, if that makes sense.
yeah,
He's a
exactly. And I feel like,
rhetorician.
yeah,
And
yeah,
there's someone else. There's someone else like that actually. If you want to check out like Ben Burgess, he's
that
also someone
sounds
I kind
really
of
familiar.
disagree with, like
Yeah.
ideologically, but like because he's too reformist for me.
Mm.
but Ben Burgess is a smart guy who knows how to argue. Like he'll make really good arguments for an anti-capitalist
Mhm.
perspective. He often does talks on Jacobin, which is another. If you want to go on the channel that does like more podcast form stuff, that's really good. Jacobin is
Mhm.
really good. They're also like it's people on the left think they're too reformist, but I think they're pretty
Mm.
good. Like Jacobin does good stuff, cover news, but they'll also cover stuff from a sort of
Yeah.
like they'll cover stuff in depth. Like they'll have more importantly is people bring on like the intellectual guests. Like that's when you have different people who know shit come
Yeah.
together on a stream. Like you really you get a lot out of it as opposed to if you streamers sometimes it's just them like ranting or reacting to shit. And there's limitations to
Exactly.
that.
Yeah. You know, after a certain amount of time, you've heard what their positions are, and like you know what they're gonna say, right?
Yeah. And Bad and Panada is another good YouTuber. It's another one. I had a hard time thinking of some because like I don't
Sounds
watch that
familiar
much
too.
YouTuber. Bad and
Yeah.
Panada is good. And for like the philosophy stuff, if you're into the philosophy stuff,
Oh yeah.
like Cuck Philosophy, Caesar, whatever his name, Jonas Cheka, or Plastic Pills. Plastic Pills is my favorite YouTuber, like low key.
Yeah, I'll check that out for sure then.
Plastic Pills, low key. I'll never tell him this, but this is like he's the reason why I got good at editing.
Really? I
Like
mean, your editing
watch
is insane, man. How do you like do
watching
you
his videos is why I was like I wanted to learn Adobe After Effects. Like you can see the difference
Oh,
from
okay.
my early
Yeah.
videos. Like my early videos, my first four
Mhm.
were like edited like average video essays. They're good, but they're like not spectacular. And then
Mhm.
my first video with After Effects in Premiere was the psychology of fascism,
Mhm.
and that's like you can see the editing just gets exponentially better.
This dude has a video on the culture industry too. That's pretty cool, man.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he
I'm
does.
definitely gonna
Yeah,
check
it's
this
that
guy
way. He
out.
doesn't talk about hip hop in that one, but he
Yeah.
talks about the same theorists that I talk about, which is like
Right.
Adorno and
Yeah,
Horkheimer.
this is
Those
cool.
critical theory.
Once you learn After Effects, is it really hard to do the kind of edits you do? Because like I don't know, I've never dabbled with it, but obviously like I know that a lot of people use it. Like, is
Have
it
you
like
used
a
Premiere?
yeah? That's what I use, and my
Oh,
friends have
okay.
told me like use After Effects, but I'm just like,
Depends what you want to do. Like if you want to do you can use the thing with After Effects, you can get all sort of really good plugins. So if you want to do crazy
mm,
transitions, animations, that you can get really do cool stuff like that's very, very unique. Like I have a bunch of secrets I do on there that I'll never share. Maybe some
I
people like
got you.
the fire trick I have around characters. Like I put the fire or
Yeah,
like the laser beams.
yeah.
That's a like that's I use this secret effect I'd use that you can only use with After Effects that
Oh, I
many
got you.
people
But
don't
is it
know about.
super time consuming to do shit like that?
That not so much because I have a plugin, but
Gotcha. So you just gotta
there's
learn it and know your way around.
honestly
And get
I
the right.
actually here's a weird thing. Like, you're learning After Effects is hard because you got to read a ton of YouTube tutorials.
Oh
But
yeah.
I actually find the After Effects stuff I do to be the most fun. Like, that's the stuff I like doing.
Satisfying,
Whereas,
right?
yeah, because it's like you make like a cool animation. Whereas for me, the part I hate doing is putting it all together. Like, I hate, I absolutely hate editing. Sorry, like I hate like putting it all together and just making these like minute little things. Like, for
Yeah.
me, editing is all the editing I hate. Editing is boring. I just like the animations. Like, that's a weird thing. I end up wasting time making
Just like
so many
fuck the
After Effects.
video.
Yeah, like, there's one video that started off with a couple of animations, and I got so into it that the whole video was just After Effects frames, and then I made transitions in between, which was meme warfare. And that's why I'm never
Mm,
making a video like that again. It took me the most effort ever. But meme warfare has probably the most insane visuals of any video I've ever done, because
yeah.
everything was in After Effects. Like, every single fucking
Damn.
thing was.
I gotta go back, and I've been meaning to watch that one. Maybe I haven't. I just forgot, but
And
I've always thought
Acid
it
Communism
was
is
dope.
another one like that.
Oh
But,
yeah, that was one of the first ones I saw from you, actually.
how did you find?
I wonder. It was either from you posting that video about hip hop or Acid Communism because it just sounded dope, so I clicked on it. Yeah.
Actually, my
Are you
culture
there?
and
All right, guys. Learn how to do stuff, get plugins, get faster. Yeah, I want to do all that, but I'm also just like, I barely have time to even make the videos I want to make, and it's a lot of work, but I'm sure it would pay off. I mean, I learned how to use Adobe just to make these, so I mean, Adobe Premiere, but yeah, I'm gonna try it eventually. Seems like it's worth it because you can do really cool shit. Yeah, everyone check out One Dime's channel. He's got some really, obviously, super knowledgeable guy, really informative, and really good measured takes, which I think is really important. So that was a really great conversation. I learned a lot, and maybe one day we'll actually talk about hip hop. But until that day comes, I will see you all later.